The dust hadn't even settled yet. Smoke and grit hung over Ground Zero in a thick, choking haze. What had been Arcadia Academy's training field only minutes ago now looked like a war zone. The green had been ripped away. The earth was split open in jagged cracks, and craters pocked the ground like meteors had slammed into it. In the middle of that ruin stood Edwin. He was bent forward slightly, one hand pressed hard against a deep gash on his side. Blood seeped through his fingers, dark and steady, soaking into his uniform. Even so, his other hand still gripped his sword. He wouldn't let go, not even now. Beside him, Elysia leaned on her blades like they were the only thing keeping her upright. Her breathing was fast and uneven, chest heaving as she fought to stay on her feet. Sweat ran down her face, plastering silver strands of hair to her cheeks. She looked wrecked, but her eyes were still sharp. Behind them, Jean stood with dust on his clothes and a tight, grim set to his mouth. He wasn't bleeding like the other two, but the shock was written all over him. His stare hadn't moved from the smoke in front of them. They'd survived the assassin's rampage. At least they thought they had. A soft, crawling chuckle drifted through the haze. Jin's spine went rigid. His voice came out low, almost disbelieving. He's still alive? Out of the smoke, the assassin stepped forward. Slowly, like he had nowhere else to be. His clothes were shredded, drenched in blood. Cuts and bruises covered him from shoulder to shin, and a red line spilled from the corner of his mouth. He looked like someone who should have died 10 times over. But he was still standing, and smiling. Not a normal smile either. It was wide, cracked, hungry. His eyes burned with something unstable, something that didn't belong in a human body. He staggered a little, then threw his head back and cackled. Ha 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 ha. The sound ripped through the ruined field and sent a cold wave through anyone still nearby. A few students instinctively stepped back. Not bad, he muttered, breathing rough. Not bad at all. He was exhausted, wounded, but his voice carried amusement, like this fight had been entertainment. Like killing them had been fun. Edwin, Elysia, and Jean tightened their formation instantly. Edwin gritted his teeth, still holding his side. Elysia forced her trembling arms to raise her swords again. Jean clenched his fists, senses sharpened to a knife edge. They were barely standing. But if he came again, they'd meet him head-on. They'd been sure it was finished. Now that certainty cracked. The assassin lifted his hand. His fingers twitched strangely, like a puppet pulled by invisible threads. He leaned forward, voice dropping into a cold promise. Next time we meet, his grin widened, you'll all be dead. Then he turned and ran. He moved with a speed that didn't match his injuries, cutting across broken ground like a shadow, sliding through smoke. Before anyone could shout or chase, he reached the boundary wall, vaulted it, and disappeared into the tree-line. Gone. No. Edwin staggered forward. He's escaping. Alicia's legs finally failed her. She dropped to one knee, swords clattering softly as she used them to brace herself. Her voice trembled, more confusion than fear. We struck him down. He should have been dead. Jean stared at the place the assassin vanished, jaw tight. He had that aura, he said quietly. It wasn't normal. It felt wrong, like something dark was holding him together. Like demon power was inside him. The field fell still again. The three of them just stood there in the ruin, listening to their own breathing, trying to understand what had just happened. Then, thud, 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 running footsteps. Dozens of them. Professors poured into Ground Zero from the far side of the academy, faces sharp with alarm. They slowed as the devastation came into view. The training field was unrecognizable. Craters, scorch marks, smashed stone, the ground itself looking wounded. Smoke still drifting in lazy coils. At the front was Principal Aldrich. His coat snapped behind him as he moved, and the air around him felt heavier just from his presence. He took in the scene with a cold, unreadable stare. The professors spread out, looking from crater to crater, from injured students to the silent center of the field. For a moment, no one spoke. They didn't have to. The battlefield said enough. What happened here? One professor demanded, voice sharp as a whip. Who's hurt? What is this? A student with a burn across her arm stumbled forward, shaking. I saw it. Another student blurted out, pale and wide-eyed. His hands trembled as he spoke. It was a man. No, not a man. A monster. He smashed through the academy's outer gate like it was nothing and came straight here. He was laughing the whole time, like he enjoyed it, like he showed up just to kill. It was a man. No, not a man. A monster. The student's voice shook as he pointed toward the wrecked field. He smashed through the academy's outer gate like it was paper and came straight here. He was laughing the whole time, like he enjoyed it, like he came just to kill everyone. Another first year stumbled forward, uniform torn and smeared with dirt. He spoke faster, like the words were burning his tongue. It was an assassin. Too fast, like lightning. We tried to stop him, but none of us had a chance. He was way too strong. He swallowed hard, then looked toward the center of the devastation. But then Edwin, Elysia, and Jean stepped in. All three of them fought him. They held him off. The professors, still frozen in shock, turned their attention to the trio. Edwin stood with his sword still in hand, blood leaking steadily from the wound on his side. His uniform was ripped, his face bruised, but his eyes were steady, focused, stubborn. Elysia was down on one knee, using her swords to keep herself upright. Her silver hair clung to her face with sweat, and her shoulders trembled from exhaustion, but her gaze stayed locked forward. Jean stood just behind them, fists clenched, stance firm. Dust coated him from head to toe, and he looked like he didn't care. He was planted there like a wall at their backs. The three of them looked like they'd been dragged through a battlefield, cut up, shaken, but refusing to fall. Principal Aldrich stepped forward. His expression didn't change much, but the sharpness in his eyes did. He studied them, taking in every injury, every detail of the fight they had survived. Is it true? He asked, calm but heavy. An assassin attacked Arcadia. Here? Jean nodded once, coughing through the smoke still hanging in the air. He wasn't normal. He had some kind of madness skill. He kept saying kill, kill, kill like something had hijacked his mind. Elysia wiped the blood from her cheek with the back of her glove. We landed solid hits. He should have gone down, but he just stood back up, laughing. Then he ran. Ran? One professor repeated, disbelief sharp in his tone. You mean he's still alive? Yes, Edwin said, voice tight. And he promised he'd return. Cold silence fell over the field. Fear sat in everyone's throat. Then a voice cut through it. Wait, what happened? Cecilia shoved her way through the crowd. Her face was pale, breathless, caught between panic and confusion. The moment she saw the ruined field, she froze. Edwin bloodied and still gripping his sword. Elysia kneeling, bruised and bleeding. The training ground torn apart like a war zone. Craters, scorch marks, broken trees, smoke curling out of shattered earth. Cecilia grabbed the sleeve of a nearby student, fingers shaking. No, she whispered. What happened here? The student's face was hollow. It was horrible. Who did this? Cecilia asked louder, voice cracking. Jean lifted his head and gave a weak, bitter smile. A madman, he said, and he almost pulled it off. Cecilia rushed to Elysia and gripped her arm carefully, panic spilling all over her face. Elysia, you're hurt. Are you okay? What did he do to you? Elysia took a slow breath, eyes hard. I'll kill him, no matter who he is. Jean tried to ease her back with a quiet voice. Relax. The professors are here now. They'll handle the rest. Cecilia's cheeks flushed at that, but she didn't let go. He was strong, she said softly. Too strong. And something about him felt wrong. His aura kept shifting during the fight. I've never seen anything like that. I felt it too, Edwin added grim. It wasn't regular magic. It felt corrupted like a twisted blessing. That man didn't care about anything. He fought because he wanted to, like the chaos was fun for him. Nobody spoke for a moment. Edwin's words settled over the crowd like a weight. Then Principal Aldrich moved again. His face, unreadable until now, darkened with steady anger. He closed his eyes briefly, took a breath, and opened them with quiet fury burning behind the calm. You three, he said, voice low and firm, students like you make me proud. Your courage today saved lives. Edwin, Elysia, and Jean looked up, startled. But as principal, I failed you. Aldrich's eyes swept across the ruined ground. I failed this academy. This will not happen again. Starting tomorrow, our defenses increase. Patrols double. Wards reinforced. We stay ready. He lowered his head slightly, a rare show of humility from a man known for strength. For what happened today, I am sorry. The wind moved through broken branches. Dust drifted in slow spirals. Nobody interrupted him. Then Aldrich raised his hand. Everyone listen. Return to your dormitories immediately. No one leaves the inner academy grounds until further notice. This is an emergency lockdown. Gasps spread through the students, but nobody argued. The fear was still too fresh. Injured students were supported by friends as they started moving out. Aldrich's tone sharpened. I want 2 full guard squads at every entrance and exit. No one enters or leaves without my order. He turned toward a professor. Elysia, strengthen the barrier spells. I want every defensive enchantment running at double capacity right now.
Hey everyone, Firescale Audiobooks here. If there's a novel you'd love to hear more of, you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. Depending on your tier, I'll make extra parts just for the stories you're most excited about. Usually I can only upload 4 to 5 parts of each novel, but with your support, we can go beyond that. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. It helps more than you know.
Then he turned toward one of the professors. Elysia, he said with urgency, increase the strength of the Academy's barrier spells. I want double the defensive and enchantments active immediately. Professor Elysia gave a firm nod. She rushed to the edge of the field, where a large magic circle had been carved into the ground. Kneeling beside it, she pressed her palm against the glowing lines and began to chant. Arcane symbols began to glow around Professor Elysia, etched in a large circle near the edge of the training field. Soft blue light flickered from her eyes as she chanted spell after spell, her voice low and steady. With each word, a gentle humming filled the air, like the quiet sound of wind moving through glass. Slowly, the magical barrier surrounding the academy pulsed and shimmered, becoming denser and more vibrant. It was now far stronger than before. Sylvia stood nearby for a moment and turned to look at Principal Aldrich. It's already late, she said. They shouldn't be walking around like this, not in that condition. Her gaze shifted toward Edwin, Elysia, and Jean. The 3 stood in silence, bruised, covered in cuts, their clothes torn and stained with blood. Their bodies swayed slightly, barely holding themselves up after the brutal fight. It was clear they were on the verge of collapse. They need rest, Sylvia continued gently. Let them stay in the main academy quarters tonight. It's much closer than the dormitories and far more secure. Their wounds are serious. They need healing, not more walking. Principal Aldrich gave her a firm nod, agreeing with her judgment. You're right, he said. That's the safest choice. He stepped closer to the students, his eyes scanning each of them. Though his face was calm, there was a heavy intensity behind his expression. Those who are day scholar shall stay here tonight. We'll station elite guards outside your rooms and assign healing mages to tend to your injuries. His gaze lingered on them for a moment longer. There was no anger, only silent respect. You've all done well. You fought bravely today, he said. But now it's time to recover. Rest your minds. Heal your bodies. Then his voice dropped lower. It was almost a whisper, but every word carried the weight of coming danger. Principal Aldrich took a step forward, his voice firm and clear as he looked directly at Edwin, Elysia, and Jean. You 3 will come with me, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. You're all injured. You need proper treatment. But more importantly, we need to talk. What you experienced out there, it's not something we can ignore. His expression darkened slightly, and the weight in his voice deepened. If there's a greater force behind this attack, someone out there targeting Arcadia, then we can't afford to stand still. We must act before it's too late. Just as he finished speaking, several healers and medics rushed into the area. Some were professors skilled in healing magic, while others were students in training. They moved quickly, checking the wounded, applying bandages, and casting restoration spells over the injured. All around the field, students who had witnessed the battle huddled together, whispering anxiously among themselves. "Who was that man?" one asked, eyes wide with fear. "Why did he attack us? Did he want to kill someone specific?" another said. "Was he alone?" a third whispered. "That assassin? He hadn't come by accident," one of the professors thought. And even though he had vanished into the forest, wounded and laughing, he would return. Above Arcadia, the sky had shifted. Thick, gray clouds rolled in, dimming the moonlight. The once bright academy grounds now felt heavy and quiet. Not peaceful, but tense. Blood had been spilled inside Arcadia's walls for the first time in years. A place once thought untouchable had been breached. Once the situation on the training grounds had finally calmed down, and the injured were being taken care of, two professors stepped forward from among the group of professors, Professor Calden and Professor Grinder. Calden adjusted his clothes and said, "We can't let him get too far," he said calmly. "That assassin fled in a specific direction. He's wounded. If we move now, we might be able to track him." Grinder cracked his knuckles and nodded. "He's fast, but he's bleeding. He won't make it far without leaving a trail." Professor Calden turned to Principal Aldrich. "Give us clearance. We'll pursue him immediately. We need to know where he came from. He might be a so-called demon lord." Principal Aldrich gave a slow nod, his expression tense. "Be careful. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. Find out where he's going and who he's working with. We can't afford to lose either of you." Grinder smirked. "Don't worry. We'll bring back answers." With that, the two professors turned toward the forest where the assassin had escaped. Calden muttered a tracking spell under his breath, and faint glowing lines lit up across the grass, marks left behind by the fleeing assassin's mana. Their figures quickly vanished into the growing darkness. And so, while Arcadia tended its wounds, two of its finest stepped into the shadows, chasing the source of the threat, hoping to uncover the truth before it was too late. Far away, in the depths of that very forest, the assassin sat on a rock, breathing heavily. His body was torn, skin cracked, and veins pulsing with a strange black light. "Damn those brats," he says. His fingers tightened around a strange, glowing fragment embedded in his wrist. "The demon's gift has this much strength." He looked toward the horizon, toward Arcadia. "Next time, I'll finish the job." So the days have gone. A gentle warmth light drifted into the room through the window as the morning sunlight slowly filled the space. The soft golden light touched everything. It fell across the floor, the blankets, and even the shelves lined with bottles of potions. Tiny specks of dust floated lazily in the air, glowing as they moved through the beams of light. Everything was calm and still, like the world was holding its breath. Kale twitched his fingers, and then his eyelids fluttered open. For a moment, he stared blankly at the ceiling, not fully awake yet. It was bright white. Kale blinked a few more times, trying to make sense of where he was. His head throbbed. Nothing sharp, but a dull pain settled deep behind his eyes, like he had just woken from a strange, distant dream he couldn't remember. He slowly turned his head, the stiff movement reminding him that his body was sore. The sheets beneath him were smooth and clean. He could smell something faint in the air, a mix of herbal medicine and fresh linen, the kind of scent found only in a healing ward. "This is the infirmary," he thought to himself. "Where am I?" His voice was hoarse. He tried to sit up, but winced. His limbs were sore, muscles stiff as if he hadn't moved in days. Just then, a cool touch landed on his forehead. "You're finally awake." He turned his head slightly. Cecilia sat by his side, a book in her hand. Her long hair was loosely tied, and her academy uniform was wrinkled at the edges. There were slight bags under her eyes, betraying a lack of sleep, but the moment he looked at her, she smiled with visible relief. "Cecilia, you've been unconscious for 5 days," she said softly. "It's a relief that you are okay." Kale blinked. 5 days? 5 whole days? Cecilia gave a small nod. "You scared a lot of people, especially me. Thank you for taking care of me." The weight of her words hit him harder than he expected. He hadn't realized how grave his condition was. His gaze dropped to the bedsheet. I'm sorry. She raised an eyebrow. Why are you apologizing? For worrying you and wasting time. I should have recovered faster. She closed her book and leaned in slightly at the back of the chair. You're lucky to be alive, Kale. Healing that kind of corruption usually takes months for some of them. The only reason he was fine was Cecilia took care of him every day. He opened his mouth to respond, but she added, and I stayed because I wanted to. Kale's throat tightened. He didn't know how to respond to that. A long silence passed between them before Kale muttered, Thank you for being here. Cecilia offered him a smile, a real, sincere one. You're welcome. Just then, the door creaked open, and a caretaker girl appeared. You're awake. What a relief. We were all worried, the nurse said, surprised. Good timing. Principal Aldrich has summoned all students to Ground 1. All years. You should attend if you're feeling strong enough. Kale nodded slowly. I'll go. Take it easy. Your body's still recovering. With Cecilia's help, Kale changed into his uniform and made his way toward Ground 1. The sun was bright outside, and the academy grounds were buzzing with activity. Students from all 3 years filled the path ahead, all heading in the same direction. Kale walked in silence. His thoughts churned with unease. 5 days. What else have I missed? As they approached Ground 1, a massive training coliseum used for school-wide gatherings, the air grew tense. The grounds were packed. First years stood on the left side, second years on the right, and third years directly ahead near the center of the ground. Kale and Cecilia slipped into the crowd just as Principal Aldrich stepped onto the stage. The old man's presence was immense. Beside him stood Professor Sylvia, Professor Caldin, and all others. But it was the trio standing slightly behind them that caught everyone's attention. Edwin, Elysia, and Jean, the heroes of the attack. Principal Aldrich raised his hand. 5 days ago, Arcadia faced an attack unlike any we've seen in decades. A lone assassin breached our walls, injured dozens, and caused mass panic. The academy was nearly brought to its knees. A hush fell over the crowd. But the principal continued, his voice deep and commanding. We endured, and we did so not because of luck, but because of the bravery of 3 students. He turned toward Edwin, Elysia, and Jean. These 3 stood against death. Not only did they protect their peers, but they also fought to stop the assassin directly. In recognition of their service and courage, Arcadia hereby grants each of them a skill fragment. Gasps echoed through the arena. Professor Sylvia stepped forward, holding 3 crystalline shards. Each one gleamed with vibrant energy, almost pulsing like a heartbeat. The principal called all 3 of them, Edwin Leonhardt, Elysia von Arctria, and Jean Halden. Skill fragments, rare, valuable treasures that allowed one to comprehend a powerful skill without the need for natural affinity or long years of training. Alicia's eyes flickered with surprise as she accepted hers. Edwin bowed slightly, his face unreadable. Jean simply grinned, tossing his fragment into the air and catching it. From the corner of his eye, Kale saw them. Dozens of students whose faces were masked in polite smiles, but their eyes burned with jealousy. Their whispers began like a slow rustle of wind. That's not fair. Why them? She's a first year. Is she that strong? She looks very weak. Jean? Who the hell is he? I should have gone to the battlefield. If I was there, I could have saved people too and killed that weak assassin. Kale watched closely. So it begins, he thought grimly. Jealousy, envy, the seeds of resentment. It was the same pattern from the novel he once read. The same emotions that divided allies and turned future heroes into threats. He clenched his fists. It's happening again. And then it struck him. Something wasn't right. Wait, where's Cecilia's name? In the novel's original timeline, he remembered this event clearly. The attack, the awards, the rewards. But there was something more. Cecilia was supposed to receive a skill fragment as well, specifically after she used her powers to reinforce the barrier and heal the injured. But this time, nothing. He turned to her. She stood silently beside him, hands folded, expression calm. Did something change? Is it because she was with me the whole time? He clenches his fist. Damn, this is my fault. I'm sorry that because of me. He looked at Cecilia. Is okay. Using my novel. All students. Principal Aldrich's voice rang out again. This concludes the recognition ceremony. You will now return to your designated grounds. First years to ground 0. Second years will remain here. Third years to ground 2. Dismissed. The crowd began to disperse. Cale moved along with a wave of first years heading toward ground 0. He kept glancing back over his shoulder, watching the others split off. He noticed Edwin being swarmed by students. Elysia, however, quickly disappeared with Professor Sylvia, while Jean was already laughing with some of the friends nearby. The thought refused to leave him. When they arrived at ground 0, students began murmuring about the upcoming exams. Cecilia stood beside him quietly, but Cale noticed her eyes flicker toward the distance, toward ground 1. Was she thinking the same thing? Or she is thinking about something else? Before he could ask, a sharp whistle blew across the field. Professor Sylvia stood at the center of the grounds. All students quiet. The field fell silent almost instantly. We have just survived an attack that reminded us of the danger outside these walls. But now, I must remind you of the responsibilities inside it. She paced across the grass with authority. In 3 days, your midterm examinations will begin. A collective groan rippled through the crowd. Sylvia smirked. I don't expect you to be happy, though. But I do expect you to be prepared. Cale stiffened. Midterms. Professor Sylvia's voice rang through the field, leaving no room for argument. These upcoming exams are not just about scoring high marks or passing a class, she said, walking slowly as her sharp eyes moved from student to student. They will determine your progression path, who will mentor you in the coming months, and which team you'll be assigned to for the field evaluation in the next semester. This is your first real step toward becoming Arcadia's future defenders, or being left behind as failures. Her gaze swept across the crowd, but it stopped briefly on a few students. One of them was Cale. You have 3 days to prepare, she added, her voice clear. Use them wisely. She paused. There will be no training session until your exam. As for the rules of the exam, I'll explain them the day after tomorrow. That's all for now. And just like that, she walked away. Almost instantly, students around Cale began talking again, their voices filled with nervous energy and urgency. Some were discussing forming study groups. Others spoke about repairing weapons, revisiting techniques, or asking professors for extra help. The atmosphere had shifted completely. This was no longer just class. It was war preparation. But Cale didn't move. He stood there, still as a stone, as the weight of the announcement settled in his mind. 3 days, he muttered under his breath. That wasn't enough, though. His body was still sore from the aftermath of everything that happened. He had barely recovered. His mana control? Worse than most commoners among the first year. Compared to others in the academy, Cale knew he was behind, desperately behind. And yet, his eyes drifted to Cecilia. She stood in the crowd, speaking with a few others, unaware that he was watching her. Why? Why did the story change? He still didn't understand it. This wasn't how things were supposed to happen. According to the novel he had read, none of this, especially Cecilia's role, was part of the original events. She should have had no reason to help him, no reason to be by his side while he was unconscious for 5 days. But she did. She stayed. Cale clenched his fists. He didn't know what caused the change. Maybe it was his presence. But one thing was certain. He would find out the truth. I will use every piece of knowledge I had from the original story, every detail burned into my memory, to repay Cecilia's kindness. Even if I had to crawl my way to the top. Even if I had to change fate itself. As the students around the courtyard continued chatting and planning for the upcoming exams, Cale sat quietly at the corner of the field. Just then, a group of first-year students approached him. At the front of the group was Edwin and Jean along with other peers. Hey, are you all right now? Edwin asked, his voice casual but loud enough for others nearby to hear. At least you were useful enough to take down one of the weak assassins. Good job, I guess. Cale looked up at him, blinking slowly. Do you really have to say it like that? Are you praising me or mocking me? He thought to himself, biting back a sigh. He gave a faint nod. Yeah, I'm doing better now. Thanks. Behind Edwin, a few other students murmured something about the assassin attack, some praising Cale in passing, others sounding uncertain if he had really done much at all. Meanwhile, a few paces away stood Elysia. Her arms were folded, and she was leaning against a fence at the edge of the ground, eyes narrowed, as if watching the group from afar. When Cale's gaze met hers, she looked away immediately, her face turning slightly to the side. Cale's heart sank a little. Was she looking at me right now? Is it because I'm weak? I didn't do anything wrong. I just wasn't strong enough. Anyway, don't push yourself, Edwin added with a shrug. You still look half dead. As the group dispersed, Cale remained seated for a moment before slowly rising to his feet. He spotted Cecilia not far away, sitting alone near the rose bushes. Cale approached her with slow steps. Cecilia. She looked up, smiling softly. Oh, hi, Cale. I just want to say thank you again, Cale said, scratching the back of his head, for staying by my side while I was out. I must have worried you. You did, she replied, closing her book gently. But I'm glad you're all right. He lowered his head slightly. And I'm sorry. I should have been stronger. You don't have to apologize for that, she said, her voice warm. You fought when you didn't have to. You don't have to apologize for that, she said, her voice warm. You fought when you didn't have to. That was enough. Cale gave a small smile. But before he could respond further, footsteps approached. Elysia had walked over between him and her. She stopped beside Cecilia, her eyes flickering briefly toward Cale. Cecilia, she said quietly but firmly, come with me. I need to talk to you. Cecilia blinked, confused. Right now? Yes, Elysia said, already reaching out to take her hand. She gently tugged Cecilia away, not even glancing at Cale again. Cale stood frozen, watching them go. Why does it feel like she had been hating me? He looked down at his hands. If I were stronger, would things be different? Or is it because I'm just a mob character in this novel? He took a deep breath. I won't stay weak forever, he whispered under his breath. And with that, he turned and walked back toward the training fields. The exams were in 3 days. But then, a sudden thought came through Cale's mind. The coins. His eyes narrowed as he recalled the assassin's final words before disappearing. The ancient coin. It was given by the Shadow Warden. Cale clenched his fists, the memory still fresh. That assassin hadn't just been crazed. He had mentioned something important, something that could be connected to the strange powers, or perhaps even the truth behind the recent attacks. The Shadow Warden, Cale muttered under his breath. To obtain it, I must go through Shadow Warden. I can't fight them head-on, not yet. I'm too weak. His expression hardened with resolve. But I can still use my mind and the knowledge I have of this world. He had read the story. He knew parts of the plot before everything started going off track. He remembered how the devil contractors worked, how they spread their influence through shadows, fear, and whispers. They often left behind trails, cursed coins, mysterious scrolls, strange markings, tools to empower their pawns and corrupt their minds. If I can't face the contractors directly, Cale thought, then I'll go after their subordinates. The weak links, the ones lurking in the slums, in the shadows, the ones desperate enough to take those cursed deals. He bit his lip. I'll start with the coin, trace it back, study it. And if I can, I'll find out where the next attack will come from. He looked up toward the sky. No more waiting around. This was his chance, not just to grow stronger, but to understand the chaos spreading across Arcadia, and to make sure Cecilia won't get killed in this world. Afternoon. After 2 hours of exhausting self-training under the sun, all 141st-year students had gathered at training ground. The students looked a bit worn out, sweaty, dusty, and some still catching their breath. But there was a sense of anticipation in the air. Around the edges of the field, a few professors stood watching silently, arms crossed, observing the students' behavior and interactions. They didn't interfere, but their presence added a layer of pressure. Then, from the front of the ground, 2 students stepped forward, Edwin, confident as always, and Elysia, calm and composed. They stood side by side, drawing everyone's attention. Edwin raised his hand and called out loudly, "Hey, everyone, quiet down for a second. Can you all hear me?" The chattering gradually died down as heads turned toward them. He continued, his voice clear and full of authority. "The midterm exam is coming in just 3 days. You've all heard the format. It's not something you can just charge in blindly. It's going to test everything: survival, teamwork, strategy. That's why we want to talk about something important: forming teams." A few murmurs spread through the crowd. "Let's be real. If you think you can pass this alone and you're not one of the top ranks, then you're just asking to fail. So don't act brave. Be smart. Find people you trust. Form a solid team." Elysia adds her voice. Elysia took a small step forward. "You can form teams with up to 5 members, including yourself. That means you'll have to think carefully. Who complements your skills? Who can you trust in a real battle?" She glanced across the crowd. "There's no reward for going solo if you don't make it out alive. But at the same time, choose your teammates wisely. Strength isn't everything. Coordination matters more." As soon as they finished speaking, the crowd erupted into hushed conversations. Some students looked relieved, others looked nervous. Everyone began eyeing potential teammates. "Hey, want to team up? What rank are you? I've got healing spells I can't support. Let's ask Jean." The top-ranked students like Jean, Elysia, Edwin, and Cecilia quickly found themselves surrounded by students asking to join their team. Some tried flattering, others just begged. Kale's POV, back of the crowd. From the back of the crowd, Kale stood silently, watching everyone with a quiet gaze. His body was still sore, and his stamina hadn't fully recovered since waking up in the infirmary. But that wasn't what bothered him the most. It was how invisible he felt. 140 students, and I'll probably be the last one anyone thinks of, he muttered to himself, eyes scanning the excited groups forming ahead. Just then, a memory flashed in his mind, the assassin's words whispered in a dying breath. "The ancient coin. It's with the Shadow Warden." Kale's jaw tightened. "I can't win by brute strength like Edwin, or sword skills like Elysia. That's not my path. I'll use knowledge, strategy, tactics. That's how I'll survive. That's how I'll get stronger." The crowd was beginning to buzz with noise now. Students had started forming teams, calling out to each other, laughing, showing off their abilities and confidence. At the front of the group, Edwin and Elysia stood side by side, rallying students to team up. Their presence was magnetic. Many naturally gravitated toward them. Kale, however, only felt more out of place. Without a word, he quietly turned away from the group and began walking toward the far end of the field. Some students nearby noticed. "Hey, isn't that the guy who just got out of the infirmary? What's he doing? Is he leaving? Wait, he's not even joining a group? Is he going solo?" One student hesitated, then called out to him, "Hey, Kale, aren't you going to team up with someone?" Kale paused, glanced over his shoulder, and gave a faint, unreadable smile. "No, I work better alone." "No, I work better alone." Up front, Alicia's eyes followed his retreating figure. Her expression sharpened, lips curling downward slightly. "You better be alone," she thought coldly. "Sooner or later, I'll kill you with my own hands." But even with that dark resolve, there was a small flicker of something else in her eyes, an emotion she couldn't quite define. From the sidelines, Cecilia stood beside, quietly watching. Her eyebrows furrowed in concern as Kale walked away. Her grip tightened around the small journal she always carried. "Why do you keep pushing everyone away, Kale? You don't have to fight alone." Kale didn't look back as he walked away from the crowd of students. Then, a familiar voice called out from behind. "Kale, do you want to join me in my group?" Cecilia asked, her voice gentle but clear enough to catch everyone's attention. Kale stopped in his tracks. The moment Cecilia's words echoed across the training ground, many students turned to look at her in surprise. But the sharpest reaction came from Elysia. She stood frozen for a second, her brows twitching slightly, her fists clenched tightly at her sides. Her usually calm and cold expression twisted into fury, something in between. Why would she say that? In front of everyone. She doesn't know how dangerous this man is. Elysia didn't speak, but her eyes locked onto Kale's back with intensity. It felt like a warning. Kale, meanwhile, was silent. He didn't turn around. He just stood there, processing what had been asked of him. If I join her group, I'll have to move as a team, which means I can't freely set traps, explore on my own, or make decisions based on tactics. And if I get dragged into a team strategy, it'll only slow me down. I don't have the power others do. All I have is knowledge. I need to use it well. He closed his eyes for a brief moment. Sorry, Cecilia. It's not that I don't appreciate your offer, but I need to walk my own path. He shook his head gently, still not facing her, and quietly said, Thank you, but I'll go solo. His voice wasn't loud, but Cecilia heard it. Her expression softened with a sigh, though there was concern in her eyes. Behind her, Elysia was fuming. She could barely keep herself from storming over. He dares to reject her in front of everyone. Good. Go solo. That will only make it easier for me to kill you. Elysia. The mood around the field shifted slightly. A few students murmured under their breath. Is he serious? He's going solo. Didn't he just recover from the infirmary? He doesn't die early. But Kale didn't respond to any of them. Without another word, he walked away from ground zero and vanished while Cecilia looked sad. Just as the students were still buzzing with discussions about forming teams, a sudden voice caught their attention. Professor Sylvia walked onto the field with her usual calm. In her hand was a single sheet of paper, neatly folded. In case you've forgotten, she began, raising her voice slightly so everyone could hear. These are your marks from the recent dungeon quest. The crowd of first-year students instantly quieted down. Professor Sylvia continued, These marks will be added to your upcoming midterm exam scores. So if you did poorly, well, good luck catching up. A murmur of nervous whispers rippled through the students. I won't read them out loud, Sylvia said casually. I'll just put them up on the first-year notice board. If you care about where you stand, go take a look. And train hard to improve. With that, she turned and walked away with the paper. Everyone's eyes followed her as she headed toward the board on the side of the training field. In one smooth motion, she pinned the paper with a small glowing charm so it wouldn't fall, then walked off without another word. As soon as she was gone, let's go check. I hope I didn't fall behind. What if I'm dead last? The students rushed toward the notice board like a wave, pushing and craning their necks to see their rankings. At the top of the list, bold and clear, Edwin Leon Hart, 70 points. Cecilia, 69 points. Jean Halden, 68 points. Kale Ashford, 65 points. A stunned silence fell over the group. Someone gasped. Kale. He's fourth in the list. No way. Another student whispered. Did the professor make a mistake? I thought he was weak. Students exchanged confused and surprised glances. Some who had never paid attention to Kale were now staring in disbelief. Meanwhile, Alicia's eyes locked onto the name Kale Ashford on the board, her gaze sharp and unreadable. Cecilia, standing close by, smiled quietly to herself. Don't pretend to be weak, Kale. And Edwin, upon seeing the results, raised a brow, but said nothing. Instead, he simply crossed his arms and turned away, thoughtful. The ranking board had spoken, and Kale Ashford's name was no longer one that could be ignored. That evening, Kale walked toward the dormitory. There was no time to waste. Just 3 days left until the midterm exams. He muttered under his breath. I've already fallen behind. I can't afford another setback. His eyes narrowed with quiet determination. I owe Cecilia a lot. She stayed by my side while I was unconscious, even when no one else did. A trace of guilt crossed his face. I need to repay her somehow, not with words, but with results. The dormitory lights of the academy were glowing in the distance, but Kale didn't head that way. Instead, he quietly turned and walked down a dark path between the East Garden and the Alchemy greenhouse. He wasn't going back to sleep. Tonight, he had something else in mind. Kale bent down and slipped under the hanging ivy that hid a small side door to the greenhouses. The old wooden door made a soft creaking sound as he pushed it open. Inside, warm and slightly wet air brushed against his face, and he could smell a mix of unusual herbs and strange minerals. Inside the greenhouse, rows of rare magical plants gave off a soft, glowing light under enchanted lamps. Around them, small bottles filled with colorful liquids floated gently in the air, held up by light levitation. Kale walked carefully, making sure not to set off any traps or magic barriers placed by the mage user professors for protection. Kale moved carefully through the dimly lit greenhouse, his eyes scanning the area. They say this place isn't being watched closely, just a few detection spells set up by the second-year students, he muttered to himself. He paused in front of a thick vine with twisted roots and strange red bulbs growing from it. This was Lurker's Bane, a rare and valuable plant used to make stamina potions and energy recovery tonics. Kale wasn't skilled in alchemy. He couldn't make potions like the others, but he had read about this plant in the original novel. He knew how important it could be in the days ahead, and he knew these plants are mainly for the students. But he left that area. I need to gather all the resources as much as I can, because I am not as strong as other heroes. I may not have the strength they do, he thought. I can't fight like a hero or win battles head-on. But that's fine. I'll prepare quietly, set traps, and use strategy. I'll win in my own way. But why did I come here to the greenhouse area? He turned and vanished into the shadows once more. After leaving the greenhouse undetected, Kale made his way to the terminal gate. After leaving the greenhouse undetected, Kale made his way toward the terminal gate. Most students were asleep, recovering from the exhausted training. Soon, he arrived at the portal terminal, paid the gold coins, and went toward the lair city. Kale pulled the hood of his cloak closer around his face, hiding his features from view. The streets were quiet this late in the evening, but he didn't want to take any chances. Instead of walking through the busy main squares of the Eastern Market, he slipped into the narrow back alleys, places where fewer people paid attention and fewer questions were asked. He walked with purpose, weaving through crooked paths and shadowy corners, stopping only at shops that looked older, quieter, and more hidden from the crowd. In each shop, Kale carefully handed over gold coins he had saved for the important moment. In return for these rare coins and artifacts, the shopkeepers gave him items no ordinary people would think to use. Elixirs of stamina, minor recovery potions. These are the kinds of things most proud students don't even bother with, Kale thought as he tucked another vial into his pouch. They believe power alone is enough, that being born strong or having talent will protect them. But Kale knew that wasn't the whole truth. He didn't have overwhelming strength or flashy magic like the top students. He couldn't take down a beast with one strike or hurl fire with a wave of his hand. So instead of trying to be like them, he chose a different path. He would prepare quietly in the background where no one was looking. Things that wouldn't win battles outright, but could turn the tide in just the right moment. With each shop he entered, with every odd merchant he bargained with, Kale's cloth pouch grew heavier. But so did his sense of purpose. He wasn't aiming to compete like the heroes. These aren't weapons, Kale whispered to himself as he slipped another vial into the folds of his coat. But they'll help me live, and maybe help me grow stronger. Kale carefully tucked each bottle into the inner pouch. He made sure the glass didn't clink as he moved. Stealth was part of the plan, always. As he adjusted the flap, his fingers brushed against a small scroll hidden in the lining. He pulled it out slightly to check. It was a plan, old and a little torn at the edges, but still easy to read. It showed how to set a basic trap that worked using mana. Kale had copied it from an old book hidden in the Academy's restricted library. He smiled at himself. The trap was simple but smart. If used properly, it could shock or freeze someone just long enough for him to run away or finish the fight. This might be useful, he thought, rolling up the scroll and putting it safely back into his cloak. He adjusted his cloak and walked into the next alley, not knowing that someone had been secretly watching him. Not far behind, a shadow watched. It was Elysia. Wearing a light black cloak, she leaned casually against the old stone wall outside a small, hidden shop. She was curious, and she knew it was Kale. She had been following Kale since she saw him quietly leave Arcadia's main gate and from the terminal. At first, she thought he was just going for a night walk. But then she noticed the path he took, quiet alleys, hidden streets, and old shops with no signs. Places only someone careful or in trouble would go. "What are you up to, Kale?" she wondered, watching him slip into another dark corner. He was being very careful, unlike most students. She tilted her head, and eyes locked on him, judging every movement. "What on earth are you doing?" She hasn't stepped forward yet, didn't reveal herself. Instead, she remained still, hidden in the crowd of moving strangers and flickering lanterns, watching, waiting. She had no idea what drew her here tonight around Kale. But she also came for the elixirs. And here he was, sneaking through Elysia, buying strange things in secret. Kale went deeper and deeper, and Elysia followed him from behind. He reached the edge of the dark forest. Without hesitation, he stepped into the dark, misty wood, and disappeared. Elysia arrived just moments later. "He entered the forest? At this hour," she muttered. "Is he insane? Or does he know something I don't?" She waited a few seconds, listening for beasts. Nothing. Then she followed. Inside the forest, the light from the city faded behind them, swallowed by the thick canopy. Pale moonlight filtered through in narrow strands, and the sound of nocturnal creatures echoed from every direction. The deeper she went, the more unnatural the silence became. Inside the forest, the light from the city faded behind them, swallowed by the thick canopy. Pale moonlight filtered through in narrow strands, and the sound of nocturnal creatures echoed from every direction. The deeper she went, the more unnatural the silence became. Elysia moved with quiet precision, each step placed deliberately to avoid snapping twigs or crunching dead leaves. She controlled her breathing while walking behind. The forest around her was dark and hushed, lit only by the faint glow of moonlight slipping between the dense canopy. Every so often, she caught sight of him through the trees, a brief glimpse of Kale's dark cloak vanishing behind a trunk, or the faint sound of his boots brushing over the forest floor. He wasn't wandering aimlessly. That much was clear. She didn't know what he was hiding, but she could feel it. Something was off. "Are you planning to kill us again?" she whispered to herself. "I will not let that happen again." For nearly 15 minutes, she followed him at a distance, keeping low and using every ounce of stealth she had. Finally, up ahead, the forest opened into a small clearing. She froze behind a thick tree trunk, pressing herself against the bark as she peered around carefully. Her breath caught. In the middle of the clearing, Kale knelt before a strange arrangement of ancient-looking stones. They formed a half-circle, weathered and cracked, half swallowed by moss and creeping vines. The air here felt different, heavier somehow, charged with a quiet hum of energy that prickled at her skin. It was as if the ground itself was holding its breath. Kale slowly removed a pouch from under his cloak and placed a few small items at the base of the stone arc. Kale stared at the object in his hand for a second, his expression serious. "I know a beast will appear here, and I won't be able to carry these things with me all the time," Kale thought. "I have to hide them before that happens." Each item was arranged with precision, like it all had meaning. From behind the tree, Alicia's eyes widened as she watched. Her heart skipped a beat. What is that?" she thought, struggling to stay calm. "What on earth is he even doing?" Kale stood up slowly after placing the items down. He looked around once, as if making sure he hadn't been followed. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, moving deeper into the forest, disappearing into the shadows between the trees. Elysia hesitated for a moment, trying to understand what she had just witnessed. But there was no time to waste. Quietly and quickly, she moved from behind the tree and began following him again, keeping low, keeping silent. Whatever Kale was hiding, she had to find out. She couldn't just walk away now. Something about all of this felt important, too important to ignore. After making sure Kale had completely vanished into the forest, she stepped out from behind the trees and quietly made her way into the clearing. She moved straight to the spot where Kale had been kneeling earlier. The strange half-circle of stones was still there, partly covered in moss and vines. She crouched down and gently pushed one of the stones aside. Underneath it, hidden in a shallow groove in the ground, were several small elixirs. Their glass shimmered in the moonlight. Elysia carefully picked them up and examined each one. One bottle. It was a mana elixir. Another was a strength elixir, often used to temporarily boost physical power. There were at least 5 of them, all neatly tucked away like emergency supplies. Huh, so smart, Elysia whispered to herself, raising an eyebrow. You planned ahead. Cale had clearly hidden these items here on purpose, probably to use them during the upcoming midterm exam. If he got injured or tired, he could return here and recover without anyone noticing. Elysia made an evil smile. She slowly gathered the elixirs one by one and took it all away. So, you want to use these during the midterm when you're exhausted? She whispered, voice low and sly. That's when I'll strike. When you're weak, when you least expect it. She stood up, slipping the pouch beneath her cloak. Her eyes glinted with quiet malice. No one will see me coming, she added with a quiet, evil grin. Then she turned and disappeared into the trees, her footsteps silent, her plan already forming. Since she couldn't follow Cale as he vanished deeper and deeper, she turned away. As the moon passes through, Elysia returns to her home. Meanwhile, Cale was deep in the forest, working silently and carefully. He was setting traps, one after another, preparing for what was coming. He knew a beast would appear during the midterm exam, and when it did, he will take advantage. He didn't waste time. Using what he remembered from the novel, he chose areas where the beast was most likely to appear, spots the original story didn't describe in detail. Those blind spots were the perfect places to lay traps. Cale crouched down beside a fallen tree and tied a thin, near-invisible string between two branches. Just past it, he set a hidden pit covered with leaves. A beast, or even a student, would never see it coming. I don't know much about the role I'm playing in this world, he thought, wiping sweat from his brow. But I've decided something. I won't target other students' trails. I won't interfere with group players or solo exam takers. I just want to survive quietly. His traps weren't meant for people. They were for monsters. And for survival. He continued moving through the forest, choosing precise locations to set his snares. Pressure plates, baited rope traps, and sharp spikes hidden beneath the soil. Each one took time and effort, but Cale didn't rush. Hours and hours passed as he worked under the cover of trees, never staying in one place too long. The sun had started to dip lower, painting the forest in golden light. But Cale kept going. This place, this moment, wasn't covered in the novel. That gives me the advantage. By tomorrow, I should finish setting traps where a novel didn't mention, because I know it will appear here only. He remembered which paths the beast was never supposed to take. That was exactly where he placed the traps. If the beast did something unexpected, like go off script, Cale would be ready. By the time he finally sat down to rest, his hands were dirty, and his clothes were covered in leaves and mud. But his eyes were sharp, scanning everything. He had turned the unknown part of the story into his own battlefield. It was nearly morning now. The sky had started to lighten with the first hints of dawn, casting a soft glow over the tops of the trees. Birds were beginning to chirp faintly in the distance, and a cool breeze brushed against Cale's face. His body felt heavy, his arms ached, and his legs were sore from walking, crouching, and working through the night. His eyes were red and half closed from exhaustion. I'll finish the rest later tonight, he muttered to himself, rubbing his eyes. Since there are no classes until tomorrow, I should get some rest while I can. His voice was quiet and rough, worn down by the long night. Cale stood up, dusted some dirt off his cloak, and looked around the forest one last time. Then, without wasting another second, he started walking quickly toward the direction of the terminal. His steps were hurried but clumsy, his tired body fighting to stay upright. His clothes were messy, smeared with dusts, bits of leaves stuck to his boots, and his hands were still stained from setting traps and working with rope. His hair was slightly damp with sweat, and he looked more like a lost hunter than a student of Arcadia. Eventually, he reached the Elysia to Arcadia transit terminal. As soon as Cale stepped out on the other side, back at the Arcadia terminal, he blinked against the morning sun. His eyes were still half shut, and he looked ready to collapse into bed. But just then, someone else stepped out of the terminal at the exact same time. A soft clack of boots echoed beside him. He turned his head slowly, and his drowsy eyes widened slightly. It was Cecilia. Her uniform was perfectly clean, and her expression was calm and beautiful. Cecilia? Cale blinked. What is she doing out during free time? He stared at her for a moment, but quickly looked away, not wanting to draw attention. His clothes were filthy, and he looked like he just crawled out of a ditch, not the kind of state to run into one of the top students. Cale pulled his hood up a bit and began walking toward the dorms, hoping Cecilia hadn't noticed him. Just as Cale tried to slip past unnoticed, a soft voice stopped him in his tracks. "Cale, is that you?" His heart skipped for a moment. He turned around slowly. Standing just a few steps behind was Cecilia, her gentle eyes narrowing slightly as she took in his appearance. Her tone wasn't harsh. It was filled with concern. Are you okay?" she asked, walking a bit closer. "Why are your eyes so red? And your clothes, what happened? You look like you rolled in mud." Cale stiffened for a second, his mind racing. Cecilia, of all people, I can't let her, or anyone, know what I was actually doing last night. He forced a tired smile and rubbed the back of his neck, trying to sound casual. "I worked overnight," he said, "at one of the restaurants in Elysia." Cecilia blinked. "A restaurant?" "Yeah." Cale nodded quickly, keeping his voice steady. They were short-staffed, and there were way too many customers. "I spent most of the night in the back cleaning, so I got a bit messy." He laughed weakly, trying to sell the story. Cecilia didn't say anything for a moment. Her eyes lingered on the dirt stains on his shirt and the dried mud on his boots. She looked as if she wanted to ask more, but chose not to push it. "I see," she said softly. "What a pity." Then she pulled something from the bag she was carrying. "I brought this for you." Cale looked at it, confused for a moment, then realized what it was. A freshly folded academic uniform, neatly pressed and clean, and it was new. "I noticed you didn't have a second set," Cecilia continued. "You've been so focused lately, I thought you might forget to ask for a replacement." Cale was caught off guard. His mouth opened slightly, unsure what to say. "You didn't have to," he started. "It's fine," she said with a faint smile. "It's not much, but you look like you needed it." He took the uniform slowly from her hands, feeling the smooth fabric under his fingers. For a moment, he felt a strange warmth rise in his chest. No one had done something like this for him in a long time. "Thanks," he said, his voice quieter than before. She nodded. "Since today is a holiday," she began, brushing her hair behind her ear, "I came to ask you something." Cale raised a brow, slightly surprised. "Go ahead." She looked down for a moment, gathering her courage, then looked up and said softly, "I was wondering if you'd like to go out with me to a lair city today." Cale blinked. "That's why I came to find you," she added quickly. "Only if you're free, of course. I thought it might be nice to get some fresh air and maybe explore a bit together." She paused, noticing the tired look in his eyes and the slight sluggishness in his movements. "You look exhausted," she said, her tone more concerned. "Here, take this." She held out an elixir. "It'll help with your fatigue. Just drink it." Cale hesitated for a moment, but then took the bottle gently from her hand. "Thanks," he murmured, unscrewing the cap. The potion was slightly sweet with a refreshing aftertaste. As it went down, he could feel its warmth spread through his chest, clearing the heaviness from his body and mind. He allowed a soft breath. That helped. Cecilia smiled, clearly happy he was feeling better. "So what do you think? Are you free today?" Cale glanced up at her. Her eyes were full of hope. He thought for a moment. "Going out, huh? Maybe it wouldn't be so bad to take a break, just for a while. Today, Elysia went somewhere else, so I came quickly. Cecilia, she is too kind. With her beauty, how could I possibly refuse her request? Just standing next to her made it hard to say no. "All right," I said with a small smile. "But let me take a quick shower first at my dorm." She nodded, a gentle smile on her face. "Sure, I'll walk with you to the academy gate." "Okay," I replied. And just like that, the two of us started walking together, side by side under the fading morning. Neither of us said much, but the silence was comfortable. There was a soft breeze, and the campus felt peaceful. Every now and then, I glanced at her from the corner of my eye, wondering if this quiet moment was real. It felt nice, almost too nice. At the academy gate, Cecilia stood beneath the shadow of the tall stone archway. She crossed her arm as she waited. She looked effortlessly elegant, as if the breeze itself adjusted around her presence. Naturally, she caught attention. Several first-year students passing by slowed down when they noticed her waiting. Their curiosity turned into disbelief when they saw who she was waiting for, Kale. Wait, is that Cecilia? Who's she waiting for? Don't tell me that guy. That guy being Kale. The murmurs started softly, but grew louder in their jealousy-laced disbelief. No way. Is he secretly a prince or something? I saw them talking earlier, too. They were walking together. Unfair. I trained like a maniac, and all I got was a sprained ankle. This guy talks to a girl and gets attention from Cecilia, the rank 4th of the same batch. From afar, Cecilia heard the whispers and chuckled to herself. She didn't mind. Let them wonder. 8 minutes later, Kale appeared, slightly damp-haired from his quick shower, adjusting his shirt while walking casually. When his eyes met hers, he gave a small, awkward smile, as if he was still trying to believe this was real. "Sorry to keep you waiting," he said. "No worries," she replied, matching his pace as they turned away from the gate. Together, they passed through the academy walls and made their way to the transport terminal. The moment they entered Elysia, it was like stepping into a lively festival. The first shop they stepped into was a potion boutique, and the moment they entered, a strange mix of scents filled the air. Something between sweet roses, burnt toast, and, was that pepper? Glass shelves lined every wall, packed tightly with colorful vials and potions that glowed, bubbled, shimmered mysteriously. Some labels were neatly written, while others looked like they'd been scribbled in a hurry by someone half asleep. Kale's eyes widened as he scanned the labels. Invisibility spray. Works for exactly 5.2 seconds. Liquid luck. Side effects may include overconfidence. Anti-frog elixir. For those unfortunate curses. Before he could read more, a voice burst out cheerfully from behind the counter. "Welcome, welcome," the shopkeeper called out. Kale turned to see a tiny old man, barely reaching the counter. He wore 3 monocles stacked over one eye, each one a different size and color. His gray mustache curled upward like he styled it with lightning bolts. "We sell everything you could imagine," the old man announced with a grin. From anti-fire bomb to romantic courage syrup. Kale blinked. Romantic courage syrup? What is that, and is that even legal? The words caught him off guard, and he repeated them out loud without meaning to. Cecilia, already smiling, turned to him with an arched eyebrow. She leaned in slightly, teasing, "Do you need that, Kale?" Kale's face turned a shade redder than most of the potions on the shelves. "What? No. I think I'm doing fine. Mostly." He rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. The old man laughed, his voice like a squeaky bell. "Ah, young love," he said with a knowing nod. "Always pretending they're braver than they feel." Cecilia couldn't hold it in anymore. She laughed softly, covering her mouth with her hand. Kale groaned under his breath. "Remind me again why we came in here first?" "To shop," Cecilia said, her smile growing. "And clearly for emotional potions." "Please no," Kale mumbled, trying to edge toward the exit, but Cecilia grabbed his sleeve gently. "Wait, I want to see if they have anything for headaches. You know, for dealing with stubborn boys." Kale sighed in defeat. "I walked right into that one." "Right into it," she said with a wink. The shopkeeper was already pulling out random bottles and offering samples. "Would you like something to ease tension, improve memory, make someone fall in love with your cooking? Do you have anything to make my day less embarrassing?" Kale muttered angrily. The shopkeeper blinked. Not sure. That one's quite rare." Cecilia burst out laughing again, the sound light and unrestrained. Even Kale smiled in the end, despite himself. Cecilia laughed, covering her mouth with a hand. "This shop is amazing." Their next stop was a clothing stall where enchanted cloaks flapped on their own. "Try this," a saleslady exclaimed, throwing a shimmering blue scarf onto Kale's shoulders. Kale staggered as the scarf tightened around his neck like a needy cat. "Gah, I think it's choking me." Cecilia doubled over with laughter, pulling the scarf off before it turned sentient. "You look dashing," she said between giggles. "Like a heroic scarecrow." Kale sighed. "I'm glad I can be your fashion experiment." As they strolled deeper into the city, they stopped by a small bakery where a glowing cupcake floated out of the oven. "Try the floating ones," the baker insisted. "They're light and full of joy." Kale bit into one and promptly started floating 2 inches off the ground. "Cecilia, I think I'm becoming joy itself." She laughed again, holding his hand to pull him down, but it only made her hover slightly too. They floated awkwardly for a moment before the baker gave them the defloat cookie. "That's one way to bond," Cecilia said, brushing her hair back after landing. By evening, the sun had mellowed into a warm gold. They passed through the small Elysia garden, filled with whispering wind chimes and fireflies. Cecilia twirled once beside a glowing lantern tree. "This place is beautiful," she whispered. Kale nodded, watching her. "It is." This place wasn't mentioned in the novel, Kale thought. Their final stop was a quiet park tucked away at the edge of the city, far from the noisy shops and enchanted distractions. The two of them found a spot on the open green lawn, just beside a fountain where enchanted fish swam lazily through the air, their glowing fins casting faint, shimmering trails behind them like falling stars. Children nearby squealed with joy as they leapt and waved at the floating fish, trying to catch one, but always missing by just a few inches. The laughter was soft in the distance, blending with the quiet gurgle of the fountain and the soft chirping of birds settling into the trees. Kale and Cecilia sat on the trimmed grass, close but not touching, with the golden evening light spilling across their faces. The sunset was stunning, a soft wash of orange, pink, and violet that seemed painted just for them. The clouds were gentle strokes on the canvas of the sky, and the wind had cooled into something peaceful and tender. Cecilia leaned back with a deep sigh, her arms stretched behind her to support her weight, her head tilted up toward the sky. "Today was unexpectedly fun," she said, her voice soft, almost dreamy. Kale smiled faintly, his eyes still watching the horizon. "Yeah," he murmured. She turned slightly, eyes catching his expression. "It's all thanks to you. You're sweet." Her words weren't overly flirty. She didn't even say them with a teasing tone. It was simple and honest. That made it worse for Kale. "You, he stuttered, turning a deep shade of red, the tips of his ears visibly burning. He looked away, pretending to focus on a particularly daring fish hovering above the fountain. But he had no idea what it was doing. He couldn't think. A gentle silence settled between them, not the kind that felt uncomfortable or forced, but one that felt natural, peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that happens when two people don't feel the need to speak just to fill the air. No tension, no awkwardness, just presence. They sat together like that for a while, letting time slow down around them. The sky above had begun to shift, changing from warm orange to soft purple, as if someone were painting it with calm, careful brushstrokes. The sun dipped lower behind the distant hills, its golden light stretching long across the grass before slowly fading away. Around them, the enchanted fish floating above the fountain glowed more brightly in the deepening dusk. Their scales shimmered like tiny stars, drifting lazily through the air. A few children nearby were still trying to catch them, giggling every time the fish dodged their grasp with playful spins. The soft hum of cicadas filled the air, their chorus blending into the background like nature's lullaby. Here and there, fireflies began to appear, blinking in and out like little pulses of magic. Cecilia shifted slightly on the grass, moving just a bit closer to Kale. She tilted her head to the side, her hair brushing against her shoulder. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely louder than the breeze. "You've been different lately," she said. "Quieter than usual. Like there's something always on your mind, like you're carrying something heavy. Are you all right, Kale?" Kale didn't answer right away. He stayed quiet, eyes still on the sky, but not really looking at it. The words hung in the air between them, gentle but sharp, like a soft finger pressing against an old bruise. After a moment, he finally turned his head and looked at her. Really looked at her. Not just a passing glance, but the kind of gaze that paused time. He noticed the soft curve of her lips, the small rise and fall of her breath, and the gentle light in her eyes that seemed to reflect the stars just beginning to form above. For a brief second, everything else was forgotten. The city, the academy, the worry, the secrets. In his eyes, there was only her. The way she made the world quieter, calmer, lighter, like all the storms in his mind were forced to slow down when she was near. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come out. What could he even say? That she was right? That he was different? That every moment he spent here, every moment that felt too real, only reminded him more that this world might not belong to him? Instead, he swallowed the lump in his throat and gave a small, tired smile. Maybe, he said softly. Cecilia didn't press. She just held his gaze. Her expression was unreadable but kind, like she was waiting, not for an answer, but for him to feel safe enough to give one soft kiss when he was ready. The quiet returned, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with unsaid thoughts, quiet feelings, and the unspoken comfort of simply having someone beside you who understood, even if they didn't fully know why. Around them, the night crept in slowly, covering the sky in velvet. A single star blinked into view above them, and still they sat there, side by side, both watching and thinking. Together, in silence. But not alone. Cecilia's hand brushed against his, and their fingers hesitated before touching. His heart thumped hard. Her face was closer now, and so was his. He could smell her like the smell of a flower, faint like cherry blossoms, and the warmth of her breath. They both leaned in. Their faces were inches apart. Cale's eyes flicked to her lips, just a little closer. But suddenly his heart dropped. This isn't real. I'm not from this world, and neither this world is real. Cecilia approached him, closing her eyes for a kiss. What am I doing? Making memories? Falling in love? For what? None of this belongs to me. And then the darker thought. But then if this world isn't real, why do I have to survive in it? A cold chill swept through him, not from the wind, but from inside. Something deep, something unsettling. His mind pulled him back from the warmth, from Cecilia, from everything that felt good. He blinked and pulled back slightly, and made an excuse. He blinked and pulled back slightly, and made an excuse. It's getting dark, he said suddenly, forcing a light tone. And I didn't sleep well last night. I should probably head back. Cecilia froze for a moment, as if she hadn't expected him to speak. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes had a flash of disappointment. Still, she gave a soft nod and smiled. Of course. We can head back. Don't tell me that Cale thought. Cale stood up, brushing the grass from his trousers, and offered her a hand. She took it, rising gently to her feet. Neither of them spoke as they walked down the path back toward the terminal station. The light around them had faded into deep violet, and small lanterns lit the way, floating like stars just above the path. Cale walked in silence beside Cecilia, his hands tucked in his pockets, his shoulders slightly hunched. He kept his eyes low, staring at the cobblestones, at the flickering lanterns lining the path, even at the grass between the cracks, but he didn't dare look at her. He could still feel the warmth of her presence beside him. That moment they'd shared near the fountain, so close, so intimate, it lingered in his chest like a flame that wouldn't go out. The memory of her leaning in, the look in her eyes, and how their lips were just inches apart. It wasn't just awkward, it hurt. A dull ache tugged at him with every step he took away from that bench, from what might have happened. A thought that hung to the edges of his mind. What if all of this isn't real? What if this is just a dream I'll eventually wake up from? What if none of this, Cecilia, the academy, even this city, was ever truly mine to begin with? He didn't belong here. He knew it. No matter how many smiles he shared or how many steps he took in this world, it always felt like he was walking through pages of a story someone else had written. And if that was true, then what right did he have to hold on to a moment like that? What right did he have to feel something so real in a world that might be fake? They arrived at the carriage station just as it was about to become night. A few people milled around, students, townsfolk, waiting for their rides back home. Cale stepped ahead and quietly bought 2 tickets from the booth, slipping the coins into the vendor's hand without a word. He handed one to Cecilia without meeting her gaze. She took it, her fingers brushing his for a split second, but neither of them said anything. Cecilia didn't seem upset. She wasn't cold or angry, just quiet. Her usual sharpness, the teasing smirk or playful glint in her eyes, had been replaced by something softer, thoughtful, as if she, too, was trying to understand what that moment meant, or why he had pulled away from it. Cale stood beside her at the edge of the terminal, still staring off into the distance, pretending to study the passing carriages. But in truth, his thoughts were a storm. He had tried to act like it didn't affect him, tried to convince himself that it didn't matter. But it did. It mattered too much, and that terrified him more than anything else. As they sat down inside the carriage and it began to roll back toward the Arcadia, Cecilia finally spoke again. "You always have this look in your eyes," she said quietly. Cale turned to her. "What kind of look?" She looked out the window as the trees passed by, their shadows dancing along the road. "Like you're chasing something you've already lost." Cale didn't answer. He couldn't. So he just looked forward, hands folded in his lap, as the carriage carried them both back to the place where everything had started, while his heart still lingered behind in the fading light of that park, beneath the glow of flying fish and almost kisses. The quiet between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't easy either. It was the kind of silence filled with thoughts neither of them dared to speak. Cale finally glanced her way, not directly, just enough to catch the edge of her sleeve in his peripheral vision. Then he cleared his throat softly and spoke. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "For the uniform. I didn't get the chance to say it earlier." Cecilia didn't respond immediately, but after a pause, she nodded. "It's just a uniform," she replied, though her tone carried a faint warmth. "But I hope if it fits you, it will." Cale managed a faint smile. A moment later, he added, "Tomorrow, I hope you come to the academy. Madame Sylvia said she'll be giving a lecture, something about how the midterm exams will be structured." Cecilia blinked, then gave a small hum. "Of course I will come." The rest of the ride passed in thoughtful silence. Eventually, as it approached the terminal stop, the end of the line, where cobblestone gave way to familiar walkways and lantern-lit paths leading back to the academy dorms, Cale stepped out first, then turned to offer a hand to Cecilia. She took it without hesitation. They stood there for a second, just standing. The night air was cooler now, the scent of grass and distant pine drifting in from the hills. Cale hesitated, then gave her a small wave of his hand. "Good night," he said, forcing his voice to sound casual. "See you tomorrow, then." Cecilia opened her mouth slightly, as if she wanted to say something, but then she just nodded. Cale turned and walked away, or at least pretended to. He made it a few steps down the path before he stopped, hiding just out of view behind a tree. He waited there, listening for her footsteps, wondering if she would look back. But he didn't turn around, and as Cale walked away, something inside him stayed behind. The memory of that park, soft and glowing, clung to him like the warmth of a dream he wasn't ready to wake from. He could still feel the gentle light of the floating lantern fish above and see the shimmer of their scales in the night air. He could still sense her beside him, the quiet comfort of Cecilia's presence, the way her shoulder had almost brushed his, the way her eyes had lingered just a moment too long. And that almost kiss, it hanged him like a melody that wouldn't stop playing in his mind. A part of him still stood there, beneath the glowing lights and the fading day, wishing he had stayed just a second longer. But time kept moving. Within a few minutes, Cale had returned to the terminal, passing the same worn cobblestones underfoot, his expression more focused now. He headed straight into the forest where he should complete his unfinished works. Most students wouldn't come here until the day of the exam. It was dangerous, unknown, and filled with hidden challenges. But Cale came here now, under the cover of night. Not for himself, but for her. "I owe her," he murmured softly to himself. "This is the least I can do." He moved with careful steps through the forest, his mind mapping the terrain, using the memories from the novel he had read in his previous world. He knew the zones. He knew the ambush spots. And most importantly, he knew where Cecilia's group would be sent during the midterm trial. Using that knowledge, he slipped into that specific area. From a small pouch, he pulled out 2 vials. The elixir of strength, meant to enhance raw power for a short period of time. The Power Boost Elixir, which temporarily increased speed and energy flow, allowing one to react faster and hit harder. He crouched by a hollow tree, half hidden by moss and vines, and carefully placed the 2 elixirs inside a small leather pouch. Then, he tied a simple red ribbon around it. Not flashy, just enough to make it noticeable for someone with sharp eyes like Cecilia. He didn't leave a note. He didn't want her to know it came from him. As he stood, Cale looked toward the moonlight slipping through the trees. "I know she's strong," he said in a whisper, "and she probably doesn't need help. But even strong people need something to fall back on." His voice softened, almost like he was talking to himself. I don't want her to get hurt." Then he turned and walked away, quietly, quickly, vanishing into the woods before anyone could notice. In the silence that followed, only the wind stirred, brushing through the trees, carrying with it the faint trace of warmth left behind by someone who cared from the shadows. After setting the elixirs in place for Cecilia, Cale let out a long, tired breath. His body ached, and his eyes were heavy. He had stayed up all night, roaming the forest, thinking, moving quietly in the shadows. He hadn't slept a single minute. Now that his task was complete, he turned around and began walking back toward the academy. There was nothing more he could do for now. His thoughts were dull, his steps slow. He was exhausted. He reached his dormitory and fell asleep immediately. On the next day, the sun was bright. All the first-year students had gathered at Ground Zero. Everyone stood in groups, some chatting quietly, others stretching or adjusting their uniforms. The tension was thick in the air. Cale stood near the back, yawning lightly. The rest had helped. Suddenly, footsteps echoed across the field. Professor Sylvia walked toward them, calm and confident as always. She wore her usual long coat, and her eyes scanned the students with quiet sharpness. Once she reached the center, she raised her voice so that everyone could hear. "First years," she began, her tone firm but not unfriendly. "Your midterm examination will begin tomorrow." A ripple of murmurs spread through the students. Some looked excited. Some looked terrified. Professor Sylvia waited a moment before continuing. "But today," she said clearly, "I'm here to explain the rules, the objectives, and what you will face inside the forest." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You may think you're ready, but this is no ordinary exam. It will test your strength, your intelligence. You may form into groups." She paused, letting those words sink in. "But for now, listen carefully. I will explain the structure and the basic quest you all must complete. You will all be sent into a special zone called the Forgotten Arena of Trial. It is a massive space built deep beneath this academy. It is located just below the city of Elysia. It's not just some simple training ground. It's a hybrid of illusion and reality. There, you will face real danger, wild beasts, ancient traps, illusions, and more. Everything you see will feel real. You can be hurt. You can fail. But you can also rise. You will be inside the arena for 2 full days. That is 48 hours in the world of the trial. The main purpose of this exam is simple. Earn as many trial points as possible. You can earn points by doing a variety of things inside the arena. Fighting beasts, solving puzzles, recovering hidden relics, surviving surprise events, helping. Yes, you heard that right. How you earn your points is up to you. Choose wisely. Inside the arena, you can choose which kind of task to pursue or combine many. Here's a breakdown of the task types and their point values. Task type, description, points, monster elimination, fight and defeat wild beasts like cave howlers, ironback serpents, or shadow leeches. 10 to 100 points. Relic recovery, find and retrieve ancient magical relics hidden in dangerous trap-filled chambers. 50 to 150 points. Illusion challenge, face a vision of your past or future self. It will test your mind and your cultivation. 30 to 70 points. Puzzle trials, solve logic puzzles, rune locks, or hidden mechanisms to unlock gates or treasures. 20 to 50 points. Hidden quests, speak to disguised NPCs or interact with strange objects to unlock secret missions. 100 to 300 points. Protect the relic bearer. A random student will be given a powerful relic. You can choose to protect them or steal it. 150 to 400 points. Corrupted Beast Hunt. On the second day, a powerful boss beast will appear, something terrifying and rare. 500 points. You all shall start alone, scattered throughout the arena. But if you meet other students, you are allowed to form teams. However, if you work together, you must share your points. Some trials will require teamwork to complete. Others will test trust and betrayal. Choose your allies carefully. Professor Sylvia's tone grew a little quieter, more serious. This trial is not just about strength. It's about decision-making, strategy, trust, and survival. This will be the first step towards shaping what kind of hero you will become. She looked over the class with a faint smile. Good luck, my students. And remember, sometimes the smartest path is not the loudest. Rows upon rows of first-year students stood in straight lines, stretching across the ground zero. Despite the warm light of the day, the students were busy talking with each other. The murmuring of nervous students, the occasional cough, the quiet rustle of parchment as someone double-checked their notes or reviewed a last-minute plan. It all blended into a dull hum that buzzed just beneath the surface of silence. Some tightened their fists in determination. Others glanced sideways at the stronger, more confident figures among them. People like Elysia, Jean, Cecilia, and Edwin, wondering whether they stood a chance in the upcoming midterm examination. Professor Sylvia, who had just finished her long explanation of the exam structure, stepped away from the front of the gathering. She didn't look back, trusting that what she had said would soon sink into the hearts of the students. At the back of the formation, standing a little apart from the others, was Kale. His arms were folded across his chest, and his eyes were watching and calculating. He didn't mingle with the others or speak a word. Then a presence cut through the background noise. Edwin stepped forward from the front row, walking confidently across the polished tiles. The sun caught the edge of his shoulder plate and the silver trim of his cloak, making them gleam. The moment he moved, the crowd quieted, like someone had drawn a curtain of silence over the gathering. He stopped at the center, where Sylvia had stood moments before, and scanned the students slowly. His eyes moved over the crowd, pausing only briefly at familiar faces. He nodded faintly to Jean, who stood a few feet away with his hands in his pockets. He met Alicia's gaze next. A quiet acknowledgement passed between them, though neither spoke. Cecilia, standing a few steps behind Elysia, gave a small tilt of her chin in his direction. Then Edwin raised a hand, commanding attention. And with a voice that was clear, steady, and filled with natural authority, he spoke. Those who have already decided to form the groups for the midterm trial, he announced, his tone leaving no room for hesitation. Please come forward now. The crowd stirred. Some students looked at one another with uncertain eyes. Others immediately began stepping forward, confident and prepared. Group by group, students began breaking formation, walking out from their rows toward the front as instructed. Some came in trios, others in pairs, and a few even in larger squads. I am with your group. Elysia, I am into your group. Kale, still watching from the back, remained unmoved. His eyes followed the procession with a detached intensity. He wasn't part of any group, not by accident but by choice, because he already knew this exam wasn't about proving strength in numbers. For him, it will be different. There was a beat of silence. Then murmurs rose again, and the movement began. Students shifted, some whispering frantically, others glancing around, trying to find partners if they hadn't already. A few confidently walked forward in prearranged formations. Edwin stood with 5 others, fellow swordsmen and a support-type mage who complemented his combat-heavy approach. All of them carried themselves with the calm certainty of those who had trained for this moment. I will take the north sector, Edwin declared, stepping forward confidently. His voice was steady and calm, but it carried strength, causing the nearby students to quiet down immediately. I've studied the terrain, he continued, lifting a rolled parchment that appeared to be a hand-drawn map. The cliffs in that region are narrow but elevated. It's the perfect place for scouting and fast elimination. He glanced toward a few students nearby, likely his team. We'll start from the eastern cliff edge, sweep along the ridges, and loop back to the arena's central zone by the second day. Stay sharp. Those rocks can hide both monsters and traps. His leadership and planning left a strong impression. It was no surprise. Edwin was the second top swordsman of the first year. Then, stepping up next was Elysia. Unlike Edwin's military-like tone, hers was more direct and no-nonsense. "My team will head west," she said, her voice crisp and clear. A few students whispered upon hearing the name. The Frostwood was known for its chilling atmosphere and the dense mana fog that clung to the trees. "My group has 2 frontliners for protection, 1 healer for support, and 3 ranged mages. We'll hunt mana beasts and use the fog as cover. I know how those beasts behave in cold environments." She paused, her gaze flicking briefly toward Edwin, not with hostility, but as if acknowledging his decision before turning her attention back to the crowd. Then came Cecilia, whose presence immediately lightened the mood. Her gentle smile and warm tone made many feel calmer, even in the face of the upcoming trial. "I'll take the south path," she said with a cheerful nod. Students murmured with admiration. Cecilia's team seemed more focused on exploration and support, but with her strong purification magic, they'd be a formidable force even against corrupted monsters. Everyone could feel it now. The midterm trial wasn't just about surviving. It was about proving themselves in front of everyone. And still, Kale stood quietly in the back, watching it all unfold. And that was exactly how he wanted it. Lastly, Gene, the sharp-eyed strategist, stepped forward with his team of 7. He gave a simple nod and said, "We're heading east. I don't know what is there, but we will clear any path." After the main groups were formed and all the strong, well-connected students had found their teams, only a few were left behind. Scattered across the field were solo students and small, leftover groups, those who either chose to work alone or simply weren't picked by anyone else. Some stood awkwardly, hoping to be called in at the last moment. Others crossed their arms, pretending not to care. But all of them shared the same silent truth. They didn't fit in. Among them stood Kale. He stood quietly near the edge of the gathering, arms by his side, eyes calm but distant. A few students glanced at him, then quickly looked away. But that didn't stop the whispers. "Wait, is he really going solo? He's nuts. The instructor said there are mutated mana beasts this year. Doesn't he, not even use magic?" Kale heard every word, but he didn't react. He didn't need to. He had already decided, long before this moment, that he would go alone. It wasn't because he was arrogant. In fact, he knew he was one of the weakest students in terms of power. But Kale had something no one else did. Knowledge. Knowledge of what was coming. Knowledge of the hidden traps, the ambushes that weren't mentioned, and the secret events that weren't supposed to happen, at least not to normal students. These events were supposed to happen only to the original main characters of the story. But Kale was not the main character. And yet, ever since he came to this world, things had started to shift. So he made a choice. He wouldn't risk joining a group and putting others in danger. He wouldn't let anyone interfere with the routes he needed to take, the paths he had memorized from the novel, the shortcuts, the rare item spawns, and the enemy patrols no one else knew existed. He would move alone, using stealth, strategy, and traps to survive. Kale walked back to his spot without drawing attention. From the corner of his eye, he noticed Elysia glance toward him. It was only for a second, but her gaze lingered just long enough to be noticed. Her expression was unreadable, perhaps surprised? Curious? Cecilia also looked his way, though more concerned. Her lips curled slightly, not into a smile, but into something thoughtful, as if she wasn't expecting Kale to step up like that. Neither of them said a word, but their brief look said enough. Kale was into something. As the groups stood in quiet clusters, going over their plans, their formation orders, and what items to bring for the exam, the crowd stirred again. Professor Sylvia walked through. "Since some of you had formed groups, there will be no changes. You will depart at dawn tomorrow. Study your routes carefully. Prepare your equipment thoroughly. And remember, this test is not just a regular exam. It may decide your standing in this academy from this moment onward. Her final words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. There were no more jokes or casual conversations after that. For many, it was a turning point. Later that evening, as the light of the sun dipped below the Arcadia Academy, the campus began to settle into a quiet hum. The excitement from the earlier group gathering had faded, and students were now returning to their dorms, some in loud clusters, and those who were day scholars went home. And Cale moved through the corridor of the first-year dormitory. A few students passed by him, chatting among themselves, but no one spoke to him. No greetings, no nods, just brief glances before they turned back to their conversations. Cale didn't greet either. Finally reaching his room, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. A single desk, a neatly made bed, a shelf stacked with a few basic supplies and borrowed books from the library. He closed the door gently behind him, shutting out the noise of the academy. Cale walked over to his desk and sat down. He pulled open the top drawer and took out a folded piece of paper, thin, worn at the edges, with tiny creases from how many times he had studied it. He carefully unfolded it and laid it flat on the wooden surface. It was a map, a hand-drawn sketch of the midterm testing grounds, a map that he had drawn by himself. Using every memory he could recall from the novel he had read, the very novel that had brought him to this world, Cale had drawn this map from scratch. He had spent nights piecing it together from fragmented memories, remembering how it had been described, where beasts had appeared, where heroes had fallen, and where hidden dangers had quietly claimed their points. It wasn't perfect, but it was close. Lines crisscrossed the paper, some faint and some bold. Arrows pointed in directions certain characters would take. Circles marked known locations, beast nests, abandoned shrines, poison ponds, mana wells. And now, in the fading light of his room, Cale picked up a pencil and started adding something new. Red XS. This area, he murmured under his breath, marking a jagged path between two cliffs. A hidden trap gets triggered on the second day. It only appears if someone steps here while injured. He moved the pencil to another location near a fallen tree sketched in faint graphite. That path, the mutated beast appears here by the second morning. Too strong for most first years. Most of it won't come near it. Another X went over a narrow stream, branching off the main trail. This corner, it becomes a temporary safe zone, but only if I get there before noon on the second day. Timing is everything. He leaned back for a moment, studying the map as a whole. To anyone else, it would just look like a mess of lines and marks. While the rest of the students were strategizing in groups, reviewing the terrain with vague maps, or enjoying dinner and laughter with their teammates, Cale prepared alone. He didn't have powerful magic to rely on, and unlike the others, he couldn't afford to make a single mistake. Because Cale knew something they didn't. This exam was only the beginning. He wasn't trying to pass an exam. He was trying to survive a story he was never meant to be a part of. A story where background characters like him never made it out alive. And so at that night, Cale took a huge amount of food and slept early to get fully rested. The next morning, the sun was just rising when the students gathered at the southern terminal gate, the designated starting point for the first-year midterm exam. There were 12 official groups, each organized and ready. A few solo students stood off to the side, keeping to themselves. Everyone was dressed in equipment that suited their personal fighting styles. Agile students wore light leather armor, meant for speed and mobility. Frontline fighters had heavier gear like chainmail or reinforced armor. Spellcasters were draped in enchanted robes, their bodies protected by glowing runes. Many had special gear, mystical gauntlets, magical pendants, scrolls tucked into their weapons shimmered in the early light. Sharp swords, sleek spears, carefully strung bows, and ornate staffs. Some students held their weapons tightly, while others let them rest comfortably on their backs or hips. Cale stood toward the edge of the gathering. He wasn't trying to hide, but he wasn't trying to be seen either. All around him, students whispered and murmured. Some were excited, smiling with energy as their warm breath curled into the chilly air. Others looked focused, silently mouthing spells or going over battle tactics in their minds. A few glanced at Kale with quiet curiosity, but quickly looked away. Suddenly, someone walked toward him. It was Cecilia. She moved through the crowd with a gentle presence that seemed to calm those near her. When other students saw her moving towards Kale, they were jealous. Her smile was soft, kind, as if she was used to comforting others. She stopped beside him and turned slightly, her voice low and warm. "Kale," she said with a low voice. Her tone was friendly and genuine. He turned toward her. "Morning, Cecilia." Cecilia reached in her side pocket and took out a small bag. It was made of soft fabric and tied with a thin golden thread. She gently placed it into Kale's hands. "Here," she said with a warm tone. "Inside is a minor healing potion and crystal." Kale blinked, slightly confused. Before he could ask, she explained. "The potion is for small wounds. The wind crystal can give you a burst of speed, just in case you need to escape or dodge quickly." Then she added softly, her voice more serious now, "And if you ever find yourself in real danger, don't hesitate to call for help. Just shout my name. I'll come." Kale froze for a second, surprised. Call for her? In battle? He looked down at the little bag in his hand, then slowly raised his eyes to her face. "You're going into the southern section, right?" he asked without thinking. "Wait, why did I say that? I shouldn't have said that. What's wrong with me?" His face tightened slightly in regret. Cecilia tilted her head, a hint of surprise on her face. "How did you know I was heading there?" Kale paused, scrambling for an excuse. I heard it from someone in your group," he said, trying to sound casual. Hum, she said, then smiled teasingly. "I'll still hear it, you know. My ears are sharper than you think." Kale looked away awkwardly, scratching his neck. He didn't know how to respond to her gentle teasing or to her kindness. Still, he gave her a quiet nod of thanks. He wasn't good with words, but she seemed to understand anyway. A part of him still couldn't grasp why she was being so kind to him. And yet, he didn't reject it either. Just then, Professor Sylvia arrived at the Arcadia terminal gate, walking with 3 other professors by her side. The murmurs among the students quickly died down as everyone turned their attention toward the group of instructors now standing before them. Professor Sylvia stepped forward. With her hands clasped behind her back and her cloak fluttering slightly in the wind, she raised her voice so all the first-year students could hear. "First years," she began, "today marks the start of your midterm trial. This won't be just another lesson or a simple training session. This is your first real test. You will face the unknown, and the results of this exam will determine how ready you are to survive outside these walls." Her words carried weight, making many of the students straighten their backs nervously. Then, Professor Calden stepped forward. "Do not, and I repeat, do not, treat this like a game," Calden warned, his eyes scanning the crowd. "Some of the places are not some training field. They're wildlands, a real battlefield." He raised a finger for emphasis. "There are beasts out there, creatures that move on instinct. They don't care who you are or what year you're in. If you make a mistake, they will attack. There are traps, natural and man-made, and they won't spare you just because you're students." He let that sink in, then added coldly, "You're not here to die for glory. You're here to survive, complete your mission, and return, preferably with all your limbs." The students grew quiet. Some looked at each other anxiously. Even Kale, who had expected this much, could feel the seriousness settle into his chest. Then Professor Treneth stepped forward. Unlike Calden, his voice was calm and gentle. "Stay close to your team if you're moving as a group," he advised. "Don't wander off. If someone is hurt, heal them as soon as possible. If you don't have potions, slow down and rest. Save your mana and stamina whenever you can." He glanced across the students with a softer expression. "And remember, don't let your pride guide you. Think before you act. Sometimes a step back will save your life." Finally, Professor Sylvia returned to the front, holding up a glowing item between her fingers. It was a small, glowing talisman, like a paper charm. "This," she said, raising it high so all could see, "is an emergency talisman. Each of you will receive one." With a wave of her hand, dozens of glowing orbs of light formed around her. They floated gently toward the students, and as each orb reached its target, the talisman inside would materialize in the student's palm. Kale looked down as one appeared in his hand. The paper felt warm to the touch and pulsed with faint magical energy. Sylvia continued, "If you find yourself in a situation where your life is truly in danger, tear the talisman in half. It will instantly teleport you to the closest safety point set up around the grounds." But her voice grew stern. "However, be warned. If you use it, your exam will be reset. You'll have to take it again from the beginning at a later date. So don't be reckless, but don't be foolish either." A silence fell over the students as they digested her words. Kale looked down at the talisman. It pulsed faintly in his palm, warm and soft, like a heartbeat trapped in paper. Once everything was packed and ready, Professor Sylvia raised her arm and pointed toward the terminal gate. "It's time," she announced firmly. "We're heading to Elysia City. Beneath that Elysia City lies the place where your midterm exam begins, the forgotten arena of trial." A wave of whispers and excitement spread through the gathered first-year students. Some looked surprised, others curious. The name alone stirred tension. Sylvia continued, her voice echoing clearly. "This arena isn't just some test ground. It's the entrance to a much larger region, a wild, untamed forest beyond. Before you even step into that forest, you must survive the arena." She paused and looked over the crowd before revealing an important detail. Every beast, every trap inside the arena has been carefully placed. The royal family, the Arcadia Academy, and even the government work together to create this space. It's controlled, but that doesn't mean it's safe. At that moment, a soft hum echoed across the area. The large rune beneath the terminal gate began to glow, its ancient patterns lighting up with bright magical energy. It was ready. Without delay, students began walking toward the gate. Some looked nervous, others confident. A few clutched their weapons tightly. Everyone understood this wasn't just a lesson, it was a true test. One by one, they stepped through the shimmering gate. As Kale walked into the magic portal with the Cecilia, he felt the space around him twist for a brief second, like walking through a curtain made of light. And then, just like that, they were on the other side. The sky was overcast, and they now stood on a massive platform surrounded by thick mist and cracked stone pillars. They had arrived. The four professors, Sylvia, Calden, Trinith, and Elysia, were there too, standing in front of the students once again. Professor Sylvia stepped forward and glanced at the clock. "It is now 10 a.m., she announced clearly. "Your midterm exam begins now." A quiet tension settled over the students. "We professors will remain here at the gate," she added. "You have until sunset tomorrow to complete your task. Before that time, you must return and submit your final results, your report and B scores." She looked at them all seriously. Then her voice softened slightly. "Best of luck to all of you." The massive rune beneath the portal lit up again, its glow intensifying as the gate activated. A swirling field of magical light appeared in the center, humming with energy. Without hesitation, the student groups began stepping forward. First was Edwin's team, as they vanished into the light. Then came Elysia's group, walking confidently. Elysia gave a brief glance backward at someone, but didn't say anything. Cecilia's team followed, then Jin's. One by one, they disappeared through the portal, swallowed by the radiant light. Kel stood off to the side, watching them go. He didn't rush. He waited, letting the crowd thin out until most had already entered. His fingers curled around the strap of his satchel. The weight of his supplies reminded him of his preparations, his traps, potions, and scrolls. "No one expects anything from me," he thought. "And that's good. That's exactly how I want it." With a final breath, he stepped forward and into the portal. Elysia Terminal, Southern Trial Zone. The light faded. He had arrived. In the far distance, the roar of beasts echoed, low and guttural. He could hear other sounds too. He reached into his pouch and took out a folded map of the trial zone, lightly drawn with paths. There were no markers for treasures or traps, only possibilities. "I'm not here to fight head-on. I'm here to survive and to outsmart." Kale took one step forward into the ruins. "Let's focus and wait for any beast to appear," he muttered to himself. Kale moved swiftly. Only 15 minutes had passed since the students entered the trial grounds, but the chaos had already begun. In the central ruins of the arena, Edwin and his team found themselves surrounded by 3 massive stone lions, each nearly 3 meters tall and carved from enchanted rock. Rock lions stared down at them as the ancient constructs came to life, snarling with metallic groans. "Spread out. Flank them," Edwin shouted, taking charge without hesitation. "Breach left. Target the glowing runes on their backs. That's their weak point." Edwin already knew about their weak point. With a flash of his sword, Edwin dashed toward the nearest lion. Stone shards flew as his blade struck clean, carving a glowing mark. Edwin glanced at the beast. Do these things even have beast cores? Or are they just enchanted puppets? How are we supposed to abstract those cores? His teammates followed his orders like a well-trained unit. Each movement calculated, precise. They fought in sync, blocking attacks and striking back with expert timing. Sparks flew as magic clashed with stone. Other part of the forest. Elysia's team. Amid the crumbling stone pathways of the forest ruins, Elysia stood at the front line as 2 mutated wyverns circled overhead. Their twisted wings beat the air with violent gusts, and their blackened, scale-covered bodies dripped with corruption. "Incoming from above!" shouted one of her teammates. The wyverns dived, one from the front and the other from behind. But Elysia didn't flinch. She slid backward, frost spreading instantly beneath her boots. With one hand raised her sword. Clang! As the first wyvern lunged, Elysia spun to the side and slashed upward. A trail of freezing wind followed her strike. The wyvern's wing froze mid-air and cracked, sending it spiraling into a broken stone column. The second wyvern shrieked and tried to claw her from behind. "Ice Veil," she whispered. A shimmering dome of frost burst around her, deflecting the creature. Its claws scraped across the barrier, ice climbing up its limbs before it fell back, screeching. While Elysia handled the aerial threats, her team was nearby, engaged in their own fierce battle. Dozens of shadow minions, thin, shrieking beasts with glowing eyes, rushed at them from the tree lines. A tall boy wielding a flame-coated halberd swung wide, clearing a path. "Push them back. Don't let them get close to the captain." I'm trying," said the lightning mage girl, her hands crackling as she unleashed a chain bolt that jumped between enemies. "These shadows are endless." One of the younger teammates, barely taller than his sword, stared at Elysia in awe as she danced across the battlefield with icy grip. "She's not even using her full strength," he muttered. "She's like a blizzard in human form." "Elysia, do you need help?" Another teammate yelled from the side. "I'm fine," Elysia called back, her voice as cold as the frost surrounding her. "Focus on the minions. I'll handle the wyverns." The wyvern she had frozen earlier tried to take flight again. Elysia narrowed her eyes. With a flick of her wrist, she hurled one of her ice blades. It pierced the wyvern's chest, then exploded. Shards of frost spread outward, freezing the beast entirely. She stood still for a moment, ice particles swirling in the wind around her, then turned toward the second wyvern that was slowly recovering. Just 15 minutes had passed, Elysia thought, her eyes looking at the wyverns. And Arcadia's already releasing such powerful beasts? If it's like this now, Kale might already be hurt, or worse. She clenched her fist. "I'll wait exactly 1 hour. Then I'll move silently, because by that time, he must be exhausted and it will be my great opportunity." She made an evil smile. Meanwhile, not far from the northern wall of the arena, Gene and his team stood in front of a huge sealed gate to the west side of the forest. The gate was covered with strange symbols and glowing patterns that hovered in the air. It looked like a complicated magical lock, something that only someone very smart could figure out. Gene crouched down close to the gate, focusing hard. "Give me 5 more minutes," he told his teammates, his voice calm but serious. "Why do we even come all the way here? Am I even useful?" Gene thought to himself, feeling a little frustrated. His eyes moved quickly, scanning the floating runes. With a pencil, He scribbled new patterns into his notebook, carefully rewriting the magical sequences to try and unlock the gate. Behind him, his teammates stood alert, weapons ready. A swarm of shadow bugs, small, creepy creatures with clicking legs, buzzed closer, crawling over the stones. Their constant clicking made the air tense and a bit creepy. Even though the bugs were small, their numbers were enough to be dangerous. Jin's team had to stay focused and ready to fight while he worked on solving the puzzle. "Shield wall now," one of his teammates shouted. The frontline warrior blocked with a glowing shield as fireballs exploded around them. Two mages fought back-to-back, throwing spells to keep the bugs at bay. Jin muttered under his breath, "These runes, they're based on Eastern symbology. It's a sequence lock based on the 5 elements: wood, fire, earth, metal, water." He clapped his hands together and traced the final symbol into the air. Click! The ancient stone gate slowly groaned open with a heavy hiss of magic. "It's open," Jin called. "Get inside. Everyone, hurry." At the southern part of the forest, Cecilia stood firmly in the middle of her group. Her hands glowed with a warm, soft light that felt comforting even in the tense battle around them. Her teammates, some injured and kneeling on the ground, took deep breaths as the healing magic spread over their wounds, easing their pain and renewing their strength. But Cecilia wasn't just healing. She was fighting too. Around them, ghostly shapes began to rise from broken graves, spectral beasts that looked like long-dead gladiators. Their armor was old and faded, their empty eye sockets glowing with a strange blue fire. These spirits swung invisible weapons with deadly intent, trying to strike Cecilia's group. With a swift turn, Cecilia blocked a ghostly spear with her own hands. "Hiya!" she shouted, gathering her magic. Suddenly, a wave of golden flames burst forward from her hand, sweeping through the area and banishing a dozen ghostly enemies all at once. One of her teammates gasped, watching in surprise. "I thought she was just a healer." But Cecilia's fierce defense showed she was much more than that. "She's amazing," another whispered. "No wonder she is rank 4th. Cecilia smiled gently, even while sweat dripped from her brow. "Stay close. I'll heal you and protect you." Though she was trained as a support, her combat ability was level with that of her friend, Jean Halden. And across the ruins, the trials continued. Each team faced different beasts. But the clock had only just started ticking. And somewhere deep in the arena, Kale was walking deep. "Good," Kale whispered quietly to himself, his voice barely audible over the soft rustling of leaves. "Now, I need to head to the ridge near the stream. That's where the mutated horn boar is supposed to appear at sunset." He kept moving carefully through the underbrush, his steps light and deliberate. His mind was focused, clear, going over every detail he had memorized from the story. Everything had to be perfect. But then, something caught his eye. Suddenly, a dangerous beast appeared before him. It was a dread-rank monster, one of the rare and terrifying kinds that even seasoned fighters feared. The beast had a shining silver mark on its forehead, glinting faintly in the fading light. It was about the size of a human, but its shape was slim and sinister. It was a shadow leech, a creature that wasn't supposed to be here, at least not yet. Kale froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Wait, how is this even possible? This beast should never have appeared here. And it's a dread rank, one of the strongest kinds of monsters. Only an S-rank warrior would be able to take this down. But I'm nowhere near that level. His mind raced, caught between fear and confusion. Kale's heart pounded fiercely in his chest. Its sleek, dark body shifted with unnatural speed, scales shimmering like ink in the dim light. Is this the work of a devil contractor? He thought grimly, tightening his grip on the sword. The beast lunged forward with terrifying speed, jaws snapping wide, aiming for Kale's throat. With barely a moment's hesitation, Kale drew his single sword in a flash of steel, holding it steady to parry the crushing bite. The clash sent a jarring shock through his arm. "Steel yourself," Kale muttered, feeling the beast's raw strength press against his blade. He moved back, but the shadow leech was relentless. It whipped its long, barbed tail, slashing viciously. Kale barely dodged, feeling the whip-like strike graze his side, tearing his shirt and drawing blood. Determined, Kale steadied his breathing and whispered the name of his technique, astral severance. Determined not to back down, Kale tightened his grip on his sword. He took a deep breath, steadying his nerves, and whispered the name of his newly learned technique, astral severance. The moment the words left his lips, something changed. A powerful surge of energy rushed through his body and into his blade. It wasn't just ordinary energy. It felt pure, radiant, and almost divine. The sword began to glow with a soft, celestial light, as if it were forged from the stars themselves. Kale moved fast. With one fluid, sweeping motion, he raised the glowing sword and slashed down in an arc, aiming directly for the creature's head. His target, the twisted, corrupted silver horn jutting from the beast's skull. The blade whistled through the air, leaving behind a glowing trail that briefly lit up the dark. Battlefield. SZZZCHD. Steel met flesh. A blinding spark exploded on impact as the glowing sword grazed the creature's forehead. The beast let out a deafening hiss, a mix of pain and fury, as smoke rose from the cut. Even though Kale didn't fully sever the horn, the strike had clearly hurt it, enchanted hide or not. Actually, the beast was so strong that those with higher ranks would be unable to hurt him, but since Kale got the skill from the demon itself, it made the beast a little hard. The shadow leech recoiled, its body twisting unnaturally. Its eyes flared red. In a sudden, violent motion, the monster opened its maw wide, and from deep within its throat, darkness gathered. Boom! A wave of pure shadow energy exploded outward. Kale barely had time to raise his sword in defense before it hit him like a crashing wave. The impact was brutal, like being slammed by a hurricane made of darkness and hatred. His body flew backward, skidding across the ground as dust and rocks scattered in every direction. Pain shot through his chest. His vision blurred. The sword slipped from his hand and clattered beside him. Still, he gritted his teeth and pushed himself to sit up, coughing. Even though he was hurting, Kale's eyes burned with determination. Why the hell is the beast even here, and he doesn't seem to show his full strength? He staggered to his feet, trembling. His body ached from multiple wounds, the tail lash across his side, deep cuts on his arms, and a searing pain in his left leg. He wiped blood from his mouth and gritted his teeth. This was no ordinary fight. The beast's strength, speed, and dark magic far exceeded anything Kale had faced before. He lunged forward again, sword flashing in desperate strikes. But the leech was always step ahead, dodging, countering, and battering him with crushing blows. Kale was losing ground fast. It's too strong. His mind raced for a plan. The elixirs. Kale's eyes darted toward a large stone near the ridge, the very stone under which he had hidden 2 elixirs, the elixir of strength and the power boost elixir. If he could just get there, drink them, he might gain the edge he desperately needed. Mustering his remaining strength, Kale broke away from the shadow leech's attacks and sprinted toward the stone. His breath came in ragged gasps, blood dripping from fresh cuts. Kale stumbled through the scattered debris, breath ragged and shallow. His body ached from the blast, but he forced himself to move. His eyes locked onto a moss-covered stone ahead, the spot where he had hidden his backup supplies. "Please, let it still be there," he whispered. He dropped to his knees beside the stone and crouched low. His fingers, scraped and trembling, clawed at the edge of the slippery moss. He struggled to lift the heavy rock, biting his lip in frustration. The damp earth stuck to his hands as he pried the stone upward, heart pounding in his chest. Underneath, there was nothing. The small leather pouch, his emergency stash of healing elixirs, was gone. Gone. His breath caught. No, this can't be happening. I clearly remember I kept in here. His heart sank like a stone in the water. He stared at the empty patch of dirt in disbelief. For a moment, time seemed to stop. His carefully laid plan, his one lifeline, had vanished. Had someone taken it? Did an animal sniff it out? Or was it the wind? His mind spun with questions, but none of them mattered now. The pouch was gone, and with it, his only chance to recover mid-fight. A cold wave of panic crept over him. His hands fell limp at his sides. All his preparations wasted. The pressure in his chest tightened, and the weight of despair pressed down on him like a boulder. His legs felt weaker. The fight, already difficult, now seemed nearly impossible. And then, a piercing screech behind him. The Shadow Leech had sensed it, his hesitation, his hopelessness. Kale's body jolted at the sound, adrenaline forcing him to move. He scrambled to his feet, turning just in time to see the beast charging forward, its massive jaws wide open, ready to rip him apart. Its eyes burned with hunger and rage. He reached for his sword, but even that felt heavier than before, not just from exhaustion, but from the crushing realization that he was now truly alone. No potions, no plan, no second chance. He clenched his jaw and raised his weapon. The battle wasn't over. But one thing was clear to Kale. If he made even one more mistake, it would be his last. But it's okay. I still have one more elixir. The one Cecilia gave me. Kale's chest heaved as he forced himself to run, each breath like fire in his lungs. The dense brush scraped at his arms and legs, branches clawing at his already torn uniform. Fresh blood trickled from a deep gash on his upper arm, soaking into the fabric and dripping onto the ground. Another swipe came. A tendril of darkness sliced through the air behind him with a sharp hiss, barely missing his back. The ground shook slightly under the beast's advance. The Shadow Leech was relentless, its monstrous shriek slicing through the silence like a jagged blade. The sound was unbearable, like metal grinding against bone. A violin string snapped under too much pressure. Kale's legs were barely holding him up now. Every step was agony. His muscles screamed for rest, but there was no time. He had to move. He stumbled behind a moss-covered boulder, gasping. His body dropped with a dull thud, hidden just enough to buy a few seconds. Blood smeared the rock as he leaned against it, trying to catch his breath. His heart pounded. Thump, thump, thump. He didn't have much time. With shaking hands, Kale reached inside his coat, a small pocket, one he had prepared in advance, just in case everything went wrong. And everything had gone wrong. Come on, please, he whispered through dry lips, fingers fumbling with the flap. His hands were numb from fatigue and blood loss, but finally he managed to rip it open. Inside was a small glass vial. The liquid inside shimmered with a faint golden glow, the elixir Cecilia had given him before. He clutched it tightly. As the creature's distorted body slithered toward his hiding place, Kale's mind flashed back to Cecilia's words. Use it when you really need to. It won't last long, maybe a minute, but for that 1 minute, it will boost your strength. If you're ever in danger, just call me. She had smiled when she handed it to him, her tone light, but her eyes serious. Kale had nodded, promising her he'd only use it when absolutely necessary. And now, that moment had come. But still, he shook his head. No, he wouldn't call for help. Not even her. This was his fight, his responsibility. He wouldn't drag anyone else into it. As the Shadow Leech let out another ear-splitting shriek, drawing closer, Kale uncorked the vial with his teeth. The scent was sharp, like crushed herbs and raw lightning. With no hesitation, he tilted his head back and drank. The effect was instant. A burning warmth surged through his chest, rushing down his arms and legs. His wounds didn't vanish, but the pain dulled. His limbs no longer felt heavy. His heart steadied. The world seemed to slow just a little. His sword hand steadied. His legs no longer trembled. His eyes, once cloudy with fear, now burned with determination. Kale stood. He knew the boost would only last for a short time. But that was enough. 1 minute was all he needed. The Shadow Leech lunged, jaws wide open, shrieking as it attacked Kale with terrifying speed and hunger. But somewhere else in the forest, far from where they were fighting, Elysia stepped out from the thick shadows of trees. The cool mist clung to her uniform as she paused, listening. Behind her, the dense brush rustled faintly with the wind, but there were no footsteps. She glanced over her shoulder, checking the path she had taken. Everything was still. No one had followed. Her excuse had been simple. She told her team she needed a quick break for a short and quick toilet. A normal, harmless reason. Her teammates nodded and continued on without question. They didn't suspect a thing. Elysia took a deep breath, and in her eyes there was resolve. Kale, it's been over an hour since the trial began. He must be tired, injured, maybe. This is the best chance I'll get. Her fists slowly clenched at her sides, her fingers tightening until her knuckles turned white. She wasn't just here for the trial. She had a second, far more dangerous goal: to kill Kale. A flicker of doubt crossed her face, but only for a moment. Yes, she had come from the future. She had time-traveled, dragged back to the past with memories of the world's fall. And somewhere in those memories, blurry and incomplete, stood Kale. A boy once insignificant, quiet, easy to overlook. But that boy had changed. He had grown into something else, a figure of blood and flame, standing amidst a battlefield of ash and corpses. A shadow who had destroyed everything. I can't remember his face clearly when I was in the future, just the feeling, the fear, the destruction he caused. I failed to stop him in the last timeline. I waited too long, but I can't let him grow. Her heart pounded faster. This time, I won't make the same mistake. If I take him out now, while he is in the worst condition, I can change something. She turned, her eyes narrowing. This is for the future. Even if no one understands, I know what must be done. She stepped deeper into the trees, her movements swift and silent. Some animals were moving in the fog. Kale had no idea someone was hunting him. He was too focused on surviving, too battered and broken to notice the danger that lurked beyond the trees. There was no room for doubt anymore. No more hesitation. In her memories of the future, Kale wasn't just a villain. He was a catastrophe. The battlefield had been drenched in flames and screams, and in the center stood Kale, eyes hollow, his sword dripping with blood, heroic blood. Even though her memories were unclear and shattered by time travel, that image burned bright. Elysia finally reached the edge of a small clearing. The broken glade. She knew this place, at least parts of it. She slowed down and crouched behind the cover of a thick tree. Her sharp eyes scanned the area, and then she saw him. Kale Ashford. He was lying slumped at the base of a tree, barely conscious. His school uniform was torn in several places, soaked with sweat and streaked with blood. His chest rose and fell with shallow, pain breaths. One arm hung limply at his side, and in his other hand, he clutched an empty glass vial. That was the elixir. So, he already used it. He's done. He can't fight anymore. This was her chance. No more chances for him to rise again. Alicia's expression hardened. She reached behind her back and drew her swords. Her steps were silent. Not even the grass bent beneath her weight as she began moving swiftly toward him. This is it, she murmured to herself. This is where your story ends, Kale. Each step brought her closer. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from the finality of her deck decision. She wasn't just fighting an enemy. She was stopping a future disaster before it ever began. Kale lay there, still unmoving. She raised her sword, aiming at his chest. But just as she was about to strike, boom! A thunderous explosion shook the forest. At the exact moment Elysia launched her attack on Kale, the shadow leech, drawn by his scent and movement, also lunged toward him. But instead of hitting Kale, the two forces collided with each other. A violent shockwave tore through the glade. The ground trembled little under the force. Birds shrieked and burst out of the trees, fleeing in terror. Leaves fluttered down like green rain as the blast rippled outward. Some of the other groups in the forest have barely heard an explosion. Elysia was thrown back several steps. Her boots scraped against the dirt, struggling to stay upright. Dust and smoke quickly clouded the entire clearing, making it hard to see or breathe. What the hell was that? She coughed, eyes wide, blade still gripped tightly in her hands. She crouched low, ready to react, her heart pounding. The sheer force meant it wasn't just a normal collision. It was like something had exploded beneath their feet. Was that Kale's trap? Did he set something up in advance? Or was it something else entirely? The thought made her pause. She looked ahead. The perfect opportunity to strike had disappeared. The smoke was too thick, the chaos too loud. She had lost her clear shot. In the midst of the dust, Kale still lay against the tree. His body was trembling, barely holding on. His fingers twitched as if he were trying to get up, but didn't have the strength. The empty vial rolled from his hand, clinking softly against a root. He was barely alive. Elysia cursed under her breath and clicked her tongue in frustration. So close? I was so close. Elysia turned quickly when she heard a chilling noise behind her, something heavy and fast moving through. She barely had time to react before she saw it. The shadow leech, strong beast. Its body, long and slimy like a giant leech, twisted through the air. It moved like a spring being let loose, coiling and then striking at lightning speed. Her eyes widened. Without thinking, she raised her sword and crossed them in front of her chest. Crash! The monster's strike hit her full force. Her swords blocked it, but the impact was massive. A loud screech rang out as the dark creature's claws scraped against her steel. The power behind the hit pushed Elysia backward. Her feet dug into the earth, carving deep lines in the dirt as she struggled to stay upright. Sparks flew where metal met shadow. Leaves exploded into the air. The ground itself seemed to shake. She gasped. What the hell is this thing? Now she could see it clearly. It was terrifying. The shadow leech's skin was pitch black, like smoke given form. Its body pulsed and squirmed with energy. But the worst part, the thing that made her heart skip a beat, was the silver mark glowing on its forehead. Her stomach dropped. A dread rank. She whispered, dread filling her chest. This was bad. Very bad. She had thought Kale would be unconscious or dead by the time she arrived. That's why she had secretly taken his elixirs earlier, to weaken him. But clearly, her timing had been off. He was still fighting the beast when she showed up. Damn it, I miscalculated. He wasn't supposed to still be alive when this thing arrived. Behind her, Kale groaned and tried to push himself up. His face was pale, lips dry, blood staining his clothes, but he was still conscious. He was about to stand up, and then he looked at her. Elysia, the girl who had come to kill him. But now, she was standing between him and the monster, her swords drawn, her body ready to protect. His lips parted. You saved me, he said weakly, his voice barely more than a whisper. Elysia froze. She turned toward him, frustration tightening her jaw. What? She hadn't meant to save him. But now here she was between Kale and death. And she didn't move. He looked at her, sweat and blood staining his face. I don't know how you found me, but thank you. The words hit her like a slap. Her mouth opened, then shut again. Her chest tightened. Save you? I was here to kill you. The thought echoed bitterly in Elysia's mind, but she didn't have time to dwell on it. The shadow leech shrieked again, a horrible, high-pitched sound that made the air feel like it was vibrating. It began to slither and circle them slowly, its body coiling like a predator ready to pounce. Its twisted form moved with eerie smoothness, tendrils swaying as if tasting the tension in the air. But Elysia wasn't even watching it anymore. Her gaze was fixed on Kale. She walked over to him without a word. Before he could react, smack! She slapped him. Hard. The crack of her palm against his cheek echoed through the trees like a whip. Birds flapped their wings in alarm and took off from the nearby branches. Kale's head turned with the force. He stumbled slightly, more from shock than the actual hit. His cheek throbbed. His expression twisted in confusion and disbelief. What was that for? Alicia's chest rose and fell rapidly. Her hand was still raised, her fingers trembling. Her eyes glistened. Instead, her voice came out low and sharp. What were you thinking, fighting a dread rank beast? Do you plan on killing us all with that beast? She didn't say anything. Kale blinked at her, still trying to process what was happening. His mind was already hazy from exhaustion and blood loss. But now this? He stared at her, not just at her face, but at the way her eyes flicked away when she realized she had yelled. At the way her clenched fist hung at her side, tight with emotion. Are you worried about me? He asked. Elysia flinched slightly, her lips tightening. No, she said far too quickly. Don't get the wrong idea. But Kale could see it now. Her anger wasn't hatred. It was panic disguised as fury, concern buried under irritation. And that slap? It wasn't just about his recklessness. It was because she didn't expect to see him. But why? Why would she care? Behind them, the shadow leech screeched again, reminding them of its presence. Elysia exhaled sharply and turned to face the monster and her sword at the steady. We'll talk later. She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze turned toward the shadow leech again. Shut up and stay down. You're no good to anyone. Wah! What is wrong with her? The creature let out a hiss and lunged. A powerful shockwave tore through the glade as the shadow leech lunged forward with blinding speed, its razor-like tendrils sweeping toward Kale and Elysia. The battle begins. It struck without warning, a blur of black limbs flashing toward her. Elysia raised her swords, catching the first blow, but the force behind it sent her sliding back. She slashed forward, unleashing a burst of elemental energy, light infused with wind with her swords. The beams sliced through the air. Kale could only watch in amaze, but it passed through the creature's body as if it was smoke. Her eyes widened. What? Before she could react, the leech's tail struck like a hammer. It smashed into her abdomen, launching her sideways. She hit the ground, rolled, and gasped as blood splattered from her lips. Gritting her teeth, she forced herself to her feet. Crack! Another tendril shot toward her. This time, she ducked low, rolled forward, and slashed at the creature's underside, but her blade scraped off as though hitting steel. Still nothing. It's regenerating, she whispered, watching wounds she'd inflicted seal up within seconds. The dark blood it spilled reabsorbed into its body like reverse ink in water. Elysia's desperation. The leech launched another flurry. It didn't fight like a beast. It was calculated. Every move was precise, every swing aimed to disable. One tendril hooked her leg. Before she could counter, another slammed into her ribs. Crack! Pain exploded through her side. Elysia screamed as she was hurled across the glade again. She landed on her shoulder with a crunch, blood trickling down her temple. She forced herself up, staggering. I can't die here. Her fingers tightened around her swords and lunged forward to attack. She dashed in, leaping over a sweeping tendril and slashing downward in an X-shaped arc. Shying, but the leech didn't even flinch. It hissed, spinning mid-air, and coiled one of its limbs around her arm, yanking her forward, and headbutt her with its featureless, solid mass. Crack! She staggered, blood gushing from her nose. Her legs buckled. Still, she roared and plunged both swords into its body with all her strength. They dug in, deep, this time drawing more blood. But the leech simply laughed, a sickening, guttural gurgle, and slashed her across the back, sending her face first into the mud. Elysia trembled. She had trained for years and years, fought heroes, but this monster, it wasn't something she could defeat alone. Behind her, Kale stirred again, trying to stand, but collapsed. Elysia groaned and pushed herself onto her knees. Her breathing was ragged. Her hair was soaked in blood and dirt. She looked back at Kale and marched toward him. The shadow leech observed, slithering in a circle, watching with curiosity, almost letting her pass. Kale blinked up at her in confusion. Elysia, she raised her hand and slapped him. Hard. The sound cracked across the battlefield. Kale winced, stunned. What? She stood above him, shaking. You idiot. Her voice trembled with anger. What the hell were you doing? Fighting a dread-ranked beast alone? Are you trying to get all of us killed? Kale didn't know what to say. His mind swirled. Is she worried about me? Her fists were clenched. Her lip was bleeding. Her side was bruised. And yet, she hadn't walked away. She had stayed. She turned back toward the shadow leech, eyes still glowing. I'm ending this. Kale reached weakly toward her. Wait, don't. But she was already gone. She darted forward, pushing her broken body beyond its limits. Her blades burned with her remaining magic. She leapt high, slicing at the leech's face, spinning in midair. Slash, slash, stab, cut. Her movements blurred. She was everywhere, like a storm of steel and fury. Each strike was a desperate scream of survival. Kale was amazed. Was she this much strong in the novel too? But the leech endured. It let out a roar and knocked her from the sky. She hit the ground and didn't move. Cale stared, breathless. Elysia. The leech turned toward him now, its red veins pulsing brighter. It was coming. Cale clenched his fist, dragging himself toward a rock, where his buried elixirs should have been. The shadow leech loomed over him. And yet, he stood. The elixir starts to work. He drew his sword. The elixir he drank, given by Cecilia, worked, but only for a short duration. "Stay back, idiot!" Elysia shouted as she saw him charging. "I won't let you fight it alone." "Cale!" But they fought, together, blades clashing against the monstrous form of the leech. Each time it attacked, Elysia took the front, her skill keeping them both alive. Cale struck only when he saw an opening. Quick, precise jabs meant to weaken rather than kill. And slowly, they turned the tide. Cale's vision swam. His body felt like it had been run over by a mountain. Blood stained his lips. Every bone in his body screamed in protest, but he gritted his teeth and forced himself up to his knees. He took a deep breath, the air thick with smoke and the foul stench of the shadow leech. His heart pounded like a drum, but he pushed the pain aside. With every ounce of strength left in him, Cale raised his trembling arm. His fingers curled into a claw-like shape, dark energy beginning to crackle around him. His eyes briefly flashed a strange, otherworldly light. Then he roared with everything he had. Astral severance. A burst of dark energy erupted from his body like a shockwave. It split the air with a deafening boom, shaking the ground and tearing through the trees behind him. A massive arc of black and violet energy surged forward, slicing toward the shadow leech like a divine judgment. The forest fell silent for a heartbeat as the explosion cleared. But then, the beast stood unharmed. Not even a scratch. Cale's eyes widened in disbelief. He was panting heavily, barely holding himself upright. That had been his strongest skill, his final trump card. A technique that didn't belong to any heroes, its origin shrouded in mystery and darkness. And yet, it had done nothing. The shadow leech didn't move. Its tendrils writhed slowly, almost cautiously. Its beady, soulless eyes locked onto Cale. Not with rage, but with something else. Hesitation. Confusion. Somehow, the beast knew the energy from that skill. Because it wasn't a human skill. It came from demonic energy. From the demons. A flicker of understanding passed through the leech's monstrous gaze. It stopped circling. The forest wind picked up, rustling the leaves. Even Elysia, panting, bruised, and bloodied from her battle, noticed the shift in atmosphere. The shadow leech now faced a dilemma. The beast was sent by the demons to kill the students for the future threat. But the aura Cale just released was unmistakably demonic. It wasn't fake or copied. It was genuine and familiar. The beast's instinct screamed at it. Is this boy one of us? But he looks human, injured, fragile. If I attack now, and he truly is one of us, I might be disobeying my orders. But if I don't, the shadow leech trembled slightly, its body tensing as if preparing to leap again, but it didn't move. A low growl rumbled from its core, a guttural sound caught between fear and fury. Elysia glanced back at Cale, confused. What did you just use?" said angrily. Cale didn't answer. His breathing was ragged, and he was barely staying conscious. That move had drained him completely. "I don't know," he muttered, eyes dulling. The standoff continued for another tense moment. Cale dropped to one knee, panting. Elysia leaned against a tree, clutching her injured shoulder. Neither of the three spoke for a while. Then Cale looked up, still trying to catch his breath. Elysia could barely feel her limbs anymore. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and blood flowed freely from the gash on her right shoulder. Her vision blurred, but she could still see the beast, looming, unharmed, unshaken. The shadow leech circled slowly, its long tendrils twitching, as if savoring the moment. "I can't believe I might actually die here." She gritted her teeth. Her legs trembled. Her blades, once gleaming with sharpness and resolve, now hung heavy in her hands like slabs of iron. She glanced at Cale, who had dropped to one knee in front of her. His body was scorched with marks, his lips pale. Yet somehow, he was still conscious. "You're still breathing." She sucked in a painful breath. Blood dripped from her chin. "Fine," she muttered aloud, staggering forward. "If I'm going to die anyway." Her voice was hoarse, filled with fire. "Then I'll at least take you down with me." The shadow leech shrieked again, sensing her defiance. It lunged, but Elysia moved faster. With one last push, she raised her blades, channeling every drop of strength remaining in her body. Her aura flared, a golden hue streaked with red, fierce and unstable. Her muscles screamed, her bones groaned, but she didn't care. "I'll kill you, Kale," she whispered, her voice wavering, and this cursed beast. Her blades swung. "Elysia, Elysia, Elysia." The sound pierced through the forest like lightning. Her hands froze mid-swing. From the trees behind them, voices emerged. A team of students came rushing into the ground. Robes torn, weapons drawn. Panic spread across their faces as they finally reached her. "Elysia, there you are." As when they saw them, they stopped dead in their tracks. Their eyes widened in horror. Before them stood Elysia and Kale, both bloodied, kneeling, barely holding their weapons. Behind them, the monstrous shadow leech towered, its inky black body gleaming under the moonlight, its silver-marked forehead radiating danger. "What the hell is that thing?" one of them whispered. Another muttered, "That's not a normal monster. That's dread-ranked. Are they insane?" They were fighting this thing alone. But before anyone could move, before a single spell could be cast, Elysia turned to them, her eyes blazing. "Don't," she screamed. "Don't dare attack it." The forest fell silent. Even a wind paused. The students froze mid-step, confused. "But why? You're both dying." "I said stop." Elysia shouted again, forcing herself upright. Her swords trembled. Her legs nearly gave out. "Just one move, one wrong attack, and all of us will die here," she growled through clenched teeth. The shadow leech turned its head slowly, eyes locked on the newcomers. Its tendrils hissed against the ground. Kale coughed behind her, barely raising his head. "It's not just a beast," he rasped. Alicia's team remained still, eyes darting between her, Kale, and the creature. One of them whispered, "Did it just pause? Why isn't it attacking? I don't know what it thinks, but if any of you attack, you'll tip the balance. It'll stop hesitating, and we'll all be dead in seconds." The shadow leech hissed slowly, almost impatiently. Elysia turned back to it. She took one step forward, then fell to one knee again. She spat blood, but didn't lower her gaze. "I'm not done yet." Kale reached toward her, barely able to lift his arm. "Don't. You'll die." "I know," she said quietly. Then the beast twitched again. Its silver mark flared. The tension spiked. And in that one, breathless moment, everyone could feel it deep in their bones. They were only seconds away from dying if they start to attack. No one dared to breathe, blink, or even think. Every muscle in their bodies was tense. The students behind the trees were paralyzed by the terrifying sight before them. Kale and Elysia, covered in blood, kneeling in front of the terrifying beast that stood like death itself. She knew she had no more strength left to fight, but she didn't care. "If this is the end, then I'm taking it on with everything I've got." The shadow leech didn't move. Something beyond the tree line had caught its attention, something that made it stop. The students watching didn't understand. But Elysia, even in her weakened state, realized what was happening. "It's leaving?" The shadow leech tilted its head slightly, as if sensing something unnatural nearby. Then, without warning, it turned. Its slithering form vanished back into the forest like a shadow, sliding into deeper darkness. Leaves rustled in its wake, then there was silence. Elysia finally exhaled. Her body, pushed past its limit, gave out. She dropped to one knee, unable to stand anymore. Sweat dripped down her pale face, mixing with blood, falling to the dirt below. Her sword slipped from her hand and hit the ground with a dull clatter. Her chest heaved. She couldn't hold on anymore. "Now," she gasped, her voice barely above a whisper but filled with urgency. "Tear up, the emergency talisman." she said to one of her team members. She turned slightly toward her teammates, who had rushed through the trees to find her moments earlier and were now frozen in disbelief. That command snapped them back to reality. One of them reached into their pocket and pulled out the emergency talisman. Without hesitation, one of the students behind her, Celine, a girl, ripped the talisman in half. A spark of energy surged from it and ascended into the sky. Elysia leaned heavily against the base of a tree. Blood stained parts of her uniform, and her shoulders rose and fell with every labored breath. She didn't even have the strength to wipe the blood dripping from the corner of her mouth. Across from her, Cale was on one knee, his hand pressed into the dirt to keep himself from collapsing completely. His sword lay a few feet away, forgotten. The monstrous shadow leech had vanished into the darkness, leaving the area eerily quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Cale looked up weakly. His vision cleared just enough to spot Elysia slumped nearby. His voice cracked. "Are you okay, Elysia?" Elysia tilted her head slowly toward him, her expression blank, eyes heavy with fatigue and pain. "Shut up," she snapped. "Elysia!" One girl rushed forward. The team's healer dropped to her knees beside Elysia without hesitation. She placed her hands gently on her shoulders and began chanting softly. A warm, golden-green light enveloped Elysia's body. Her wounds slowly closed, and her breathing grew more even. The magic washed over her like a gentle tide, soothing the pain and pushing back the numbness. "I've got you, Elysia," the healer said softly, focusing on her spell work. "You push yourself way too far. You've lost too much mana. I'll help you restore the flow." Elysia's head rolled slightly to the side, her eyelids half closed. "Doesn't matter," she muttered, but her body was already responding. The magic helped steady her pulse. The burning pain in her chest began to dull. The healer hesitated, then turned her attention to Cale. She moved to him and placed both hands gently on his shoulders. He flinched slightly at the touch but didn't resist. A wave of soft, green light rippled through his body. His cracked ribs slowly began to heal. The deep bruises and torn muscles stitched themselves together, the magic forcing his body back into working shape. He looked over to Elysia, who was still leaning against the tree. His heart felt heavy, not just from the wounds, but from everything that had just happened. How close they had come to dying. How she'd stood her ground and protected him when she didn't have to. "You," Cale began quietly. "You saved me." Elysia didn't respond. Her eyes were closed now, her breathing slow and steady, recovering under the healer's spell. Before more could be said, the sound of rushing wind and fluttering fabric swept through the clearing. Professor Sylvia came down from the sky like a flash of violet lightning. Her sharp eyes quickly took in everything around her: the broken ground, damaged trees, the blood, and the pieces of the emergency talisman. Her eyes slowly moved across the scene, first resting on Cale and Elysia, both still weak and covered in blood, then shifting to the rest of the group who stood frozen nearby, and finally turning toward the dark forest where the shadow leech had disappeared. Sylvia said, "What happened here?" Elysia took a step forward. "We were attacked by a beast, a shadow leech. It was dread rank." Professor Sylvia's brows furrowed sharply. "A dread rank?" "Yes," Elysia said, nodding firmly. Its size, the pressure of its mana, how quickly it healed from wounds. It had all the traits of a full dread class monster. Cale ran into it first. I stepped in to support him. Cale let out a weak breath and rubbed the back of his neck, speaking up for the first time in front of the professor. I didn't exactly engage it. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it found me. Sylvia looked at him carefully, one eyebrow raised. "And it just lets you live?" Cale gave a tired shrug. "No, it tried to kill me. I just didn't die fast enough." There was a brief pause in the air. No one spoke. Professor Sylvia stood still. Her face remained cold and unreadable, but for just a moment, a tiny glint of amusement passed through her sharp eyes, perhaps at Cale's blunt remark. It was gone in an instant, and her expression returned to its usual composed seriousness. She gave a small nod, acknowledging Cale's words, and then shifted her focus back to Elysia. You're absolutely certain it was dread rank? She asked. Elysia didn't hesitate. Though her body was tired and bruised, her tone was clear and sure. Yes, Professor. There's no doubt in my mind. Its forehead was silver color. Professor Sylvia's gaze turned grim, her brows furrowed and her lips drawn into a straight line. That's not possible, she said slowly, as if choosing her words with care. None of the trials were supposed to have anything stronger than a savage class beast. Dreadrank creatures are far beyond your level, dangerous even to experienced knights. Her voice dropped slightly, carrying an edge of concern. We've only documented a few dread-ranked beasts in the southern perimeter of the forest, and none of them were permitted to come near this training zone. This was supposed to be a controlled environment. Kale narrowed his eyes, keeping his thoughts to himself, but a single idea echoed in his mind like a warning bell. I knew it. This was no accident. It's the work of a demon contractor. Someone's interfering. Alicia's face paled. Her hands clenched slightly, and her body froze for a second as she processed Sylvia's words. Wait, they didn't send a dread-ranked beast? Then Kale, why were you the first one it found? Did you know something? No, don't jump to conclusions.